Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching third part of What If Experiment in Naruto was saved by Kurama Kushina Minato. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no time, let's start the story.
A look of unholy glee briefly adorned the Suna Jinchuriki's face as the sand compressed as Gaara closed his hand, determined to crush the ninja inside. The stadium floor was then covered in a spiraling eruption of sand, exposing Naruto with his coat torn and his bone metal protruded. There were now edges to the row of spikes along his spine, and a 4-inch long blade of the material that now made up his skeleton protruded from each of his elbows. The spikes from his knees and shoulder blades were also edged, more like knives than spikes. Every bone in his body, including those that protruded from it, hummed with barely contained power as he held above his head twin balls of blue spiraling chakra, visible to anyone who looked, driving back the sand in an utterly impossible yet remarkably incontrovertible manner. He had retracted his claws and plated over his knuckles. With a sigh of relief, Jiraiya fell back into his chair. He muttered, "Forgot that I taught him that," immediately drawing the wrath of both his sensei and his friend. "And you, what was it again? Forgot that you had?" Tsunade gritted her teeth and said, "You taught him the Rasengan. Was it because you knew I would tear you a new one if you'd told me?" Jiraiya looked taken aback. Tsunade didn't strike the perverted Sannin too hard because she was still ecstatic that Naruto was still alive. "You'd have stopped at one? Maybe I should have told you then." He smashed the wall behind them just enough. There were people who thought this was a miracle all over the stadium and in the stands. Heishi and Hannaby, Konohamaru and his pals, Team 7, Team 10, Team 9. The list was far larger than anyone had anticipated. Orochimaru was unable to comprehend it. How did the kid accomplish this? With the other Sannin close by, he had to give the signal quickly. Even though he was still unsure of the Uchiha's location, the Sound Four were present. Gaara stared down in the stadium as Shukaku the Ichibi yelled in the back of his mind. The boy had survived the sand burial. Why not? He could feed his mother his blood if he was that strong, but how could Gaara get to the blood if he was that strong? As everyone gaped, Naruto took a deep breath, his thoughts straying to the moment he had asked Jiraiya what he could teach him. And he had seen his first Rasengan from Jiraiya. It was an unfinished jutsu created by the Yondaime Hokage. He was happy now that he had. The rest of him wasn't quite as strong, but his bone metal might have been able to withstand the strain that Gaara's sand burial put on him. Together with the wind and lightning elements, Naruto had poured his chakra into his bones as the sand had closed in around him, causing a resonance that stirred the sand and kept it soft around him. Of course, he didn't think of it exactly like that, and had subsequently compelled the creation of not one, but two Rasengan. Now, as the audience stood up, roaring with anticipation, Naruto spread his claws once more, allowing the plating on his knuckles to retract into his skeleton. The Rasengan was absorbed into them as they pierced each other, combining the destructive jutsu with the already existing wind and lightning. The outcome was a blue chakra corona that was always changing around the claws. Naruto roared out the name of the new move as he attacked. Rasenjutsu, Uzumaki no Sume, Claws of the Maelstrom. This was the first time Gaara had ever felt such fear. When he buried them, nobody was alive. Mother was always a blood relative. However, this one was unique. A year younger than him, this boy had lived. Unlike everyone else, he did not display fear or hatred. And he had not been killed by Gaara. It was not possible. It kept returning to that. Gaara only wanted to flee, but the monster inside him wanted to kill, murder, and slaughter. As Naruto charged, Gaara put his hands in front of him and used the only genjutsu he had ever been taught. Forced sleep jutsu. Orochimaru acted as Gaara fell, creating a huge distraction with smoke bombs that covered the cage's box with enormous clouds, and the cue to launch his assault. His operatives performed their jutsu. Kabuto proceeded to capture his target. Ready to throw up the barrier, the Sound Four threw aside their disguises and jumped to their positions, and there was anarchy everywhere. Naruto hesitated as the enormous creature took shape, lifting Gaara up and away while hardly holding his Maelstrom Claws technique in place. Shukaku appeared suddenly, a huge outpouring of sand, yellow chakra, and malice. Incredibly, the Biju dropped its container and its face appeared to explode from the jutsu's discharge as he snarled and slashed at it before it was out of his grasp. Naruto knew that this jutsu had a terrible price because of the bone. Deep, searing agony that shot through him. His chakra coils would have probably been permanently destroyed if he hadn't healed the way he did. Naruto could still feel his bone metal slipping back into his flesh. That thing's face was already reforming as the sand poured into place, and he didn't have time to mend. As a second explosion destroyed the now obscured cage's box on the stadium rooftop, Orochimaru grabbed the Hokage by the neck. As smoke billowed across the roof behind him, his elite Sound 4 advanced the barrier as he had directed, each with a second, smaller barrier to protect them from anyone inside the first. This was fantastic. Things were finally going well today. And then 3 figures appeared from the cloud of smoke, which was already quickly dissipating, as Sarutobi Hiruzen scattered in a burst of white smoke. Jiraiya took the left flank, Tsunade the right, and the renegade Sannin ground his teeth together as Hiruzen stood at the front in his black silk and steel battle armor. He had hoped to play with Sarutobi Sensei a bit, but these two completely altered the game. He hissed the name of the technique, Edo Tensai, Impure Resurrection, as his hands started to form the signs for a jutsu he had hoped to employ later. What came next caught him off guard. Even as Jiraiya used a Rasengan to do the same to the second coffin, Tsunade was there, seeing the writing on the first and using her chakra enhanced strength to shatter it before it could fully manifest. Sarutobi started to act on the third coffin, but stopped when Jiraiya chuckled at the front's name. The other 2 Sannin turned to Orochimaru even as the coffin opened. The gloating Orochimaru said, "That was a big mistake," as the sacrifice fell out of the coffin undamaged. He paused and said, "The 4th Hokage, the greatest Hokage." What? Jiraiya had time to explain because of the shocked expression on his face when his perfect jutsu failed. It wasn't a question, but rather, you want to know how it failed. All I can tell you is that the Shinigami doesn't like those who try to steal from him, and Minato's soul was sealed inside the Shinigami's stomach. If you had summoned him, you would also have brought the Shinigami, but the Shinigami would not have been bound to your will, and might have been a little upset. The signal was received by the Suna ninja outside the walls, and the Auto summoners among them started the summoning. Soon, the armies of Suna and Auto were behind 5 enormous vipers that were slithering towards Konoha's defenses. At the signal, the covert infiltrators launched into action and began executing a forced sleep genjutsu. And things started to go south from there. They had been spotted immediately, and each had been tagged by a specific Anbu, without someone on the inside to alter the records, as Kabuto could have done if he had gotten past detection. As they launched their hand seals, they were struck hard and defeated one by one, concentrating on the targets that would have made Konoha's recovery impossible and left the village without anyone to turn to. Aside from the one individual who isn't there. Danzo Shimura. He was shocked when a man wearing a Kumo headband struck down the apparent Anbu who was performing it, much to the surprise of the 3 Kumo students with him. Hyuga Hiyashi's Byakugan and Hannaby's had both been in use when the Wood.Be assassin made his move, so the genjutsu would not have affected them. The Kumo team's Jonin Sensei snarled at them, sighing. He said, "I'll explain later, and give you all a choice," in the quiet voice he frequently employed when important matters were at stake. "Until then, defend the leaf, especially the Hyuga. I know about the secret mission, Raikage Baka gave you, but bear in mind he is not here, I am, and so are you." Even as he ran off to battle, Heishi knew all he needed to know about this man's identity from the gray, crane embroidered cloak that whirled around his shoulders. In the hospital courtyard, Ishiguma Daikenshi stood with Koshi on one side and his daughter on the other. It was utterly absurd to consider that Otome was actually related to the boy who had defeated her, causing her to carelessly use the enormous amounts of chakra needed by the Iron Bear and unintentionally giving her an off switch for her Kekkei Genkei. As the infiltrators from Auto and Suna showed up, he decided. Using the same combative posture he had taught his daughter, he remarked, "Never liked Iwa Winters anyway, maybe I'll get a chance to spar with that Maida guy." These intruders would never understand what had happened to them. Thanks to Kurenai Sensei, Naruto had some knowledge of genjutsu. Although he wasn't very good at it, he managed to get inside them. Almost no one ever considered doing anything about the sense of smell, and when they did, they were constrained by their own senses, so it was much easier to notice them with his enhanced senses. However, Gaara's use of self-imposed sleep was problematic. He could see that Gaara's seal was flawed, that it leaked too much of the Ichibi's emotions into its host, even though he was new to Fuinjutsu. This could only be won in 3 different ways. Killing the host was the first, and it was unpleasant. He could if he had to, but that was a last resort because Gaara had likely had as many options as Naruto. Particularly since it wouldn't instantly spread Shukaku. Fixing the seal would be the second choice, but Naruto was unsure of how to start. Since the host apparently needed to be asleep in order to release the monster. The third option was to wake him up in some way. Additionally, the blonde Jinchuriki was aware of 3 methods for defeating a genjutsu. Strange how things seem to happen that way at times, he thought. Chakra agitation would be effective, but it appeared that the monster had most of his chakra. That might take some time. It was a good idea to destroy the chakra anchors in a chakra pulse, particularly for wide-area genjutsu, and Naruto was able to destroy those over a far larger area than anyone else could have imagined. The third option was the one he believed would be most effective. Discomfort in the body. Gaara's trance was broken when Naruto pulled his fist back, as well as his nose. Everyone in the stadium recoiled at the cry of desperation as the Ichibi dispersed, even though Gaara's siblings were standing next to him, prepared but undoubtedly not excited to battle Naruto, while the redhead gazed at the blood streaming down his face and into his hands. His own blood. It should have been on the inside. Why? He asked, glancing up at the younger, more saner Jinchuriki. Naruto turned away after a slight flare and a hint of the red chakra. Naruto said, because I know, while looking around the stands for Hinata. And discovered her right before her gentle storm pounded Baki, the Tsunajonin, into the wall. If it weren't for her, he said, pointing to her, then we wouldn't be having this talk. Because Konohamaru no Sato would have been the first thing destroyed. But she is here, so I am here, and I have found those precious to me, because I am precious to them. Naruto vanished in a flash, disappearing and then reappearing where Hinata and Shino were after he swallowed a soldier pill. Sasuke gave the white-haired man who was holding him a fierce look. When Kabuto grabbed Sasuke, his mask came off, and Kakashi couldn't ignore the threat posed by the scalpel held to his throat. The curse mark hissed its terrible promises as the renegade medic pressed it against the Uchiha boy's throat, and Sasuke found it difficult to resist the blandishments given his circumstances. He stiffened, prepared to act on his sensei's orders. When a pink-haired girl who appeared to be sleeping jammed a kunai into the older genin's knee from the side and twisted it so the bones themselves would hold it in place, Kabuto flinched, relieving pressure on Sasuke's neck. He then used Kawarimi to replace it with a chair, wincing as the curse mark attempted to pour the black chakra into the jutsu. As the silk parted and the front flap fell to the ground, Sakura had just struck and leapt back as Kabuto barely sliced at her dress. However, it was only the silk. The renegade ninja's eyes were drawn to the kunai by a sudden hiss. And the tag that explodes on it. With little time to realize that he was powerless to stop this. His leg was blown to pieces by the explosion. Orochimaru could have prevailed against the old man alone. The battle would have been more difficult against either of the other Sannin, but he would have prevailed. He had no chance against any of the 3, and that barrier kept him in just as much as it kept others out. He had to remain 3 times as active as they did, and his physical stamina was starting to wane as he twisted away from Tsunade's attacks while dodging Jiraiya's and Sarutobi Sensei's ninjutsu attacks. To make matters worse, he would gain 4 allies if his followers were to drop the barrier, but his enemies would gain a great many more. As Team 8 and their sensei emerged on the roof's edge, the Anbu surrounding the barrier was searching desperately for a way through and coming up empty. What progress? The sensei of the Jonin inquired. None, the Anbu captain spat, his hate speech muffled by his rabbit-shaped mask. As he stomped on the roof to explain, the barrier prevents the passage of both chakra and physical objects by destroying them, and even continues underneath the tiles. While shaking the sand from his sandals, he paused as Naruto raised the bright blue orb of a Rasengan, saying, in theory, there's a gap, but we can't take advantage of it. I said that won't work. He stopped when he saw Naruto's smile. The genin said, oh, this isn't for the barrier, and slammed the destructive jutsu into the roof near the corner of the barrier. The roof collapsed out and away from the barrier due to the massive chakra detonation, taking with it the young people who were guarding this corner. They resembled the Siamese twins and screamed as they passed through the extremely lethal barrier they were securing. Yukon, Sakin died quickly and cleanly, and the barrier collapsed. Orochimaru grimaced as Anbu swiftly swept under the auto elites. This was not functioning. He needed to escape and come up with a fresh plan. He swore once more that Konoha would fall as he shunned away, shedding his skin as a decoy and distraction. As the reports came in, Hiruzen glanced around. The picture was gloomy. I need guards for the civilians, messengers, and something to stop those blasted snake summons, he growled as soon as the reports arrived. Team 8 grinned as they looked at one another. If the Anbu, Jonin, and other shinobi can hold out, we have those covered, Hinata said, and the 3 genin swung their scrolls from their backs in unison. Jiraiya recognized the seals on the summons contracts he had assisted in creating, but he was only aware of the terms of the binding and not what had been agreed to be bound by them. And the third one, the Mantis Ridge contract, was that they were the finest of all the summons guards. Aburame Shino, bearer of the Mantis Ridge contract. We can handle the need for guards for the civilian bunkers. Hyuga Hinata, bearer of the Squirrel Hollow contract. No finer messengers exist. They were taken aback by Naruto because they expected him to call forth foxes, like his prisoner, or toads, like Jiraiya. However, the boy had gone a little farther afield for his summons after learning that the seal on his belly prevented him from connecting to any foxes in such a manner. Uzumaki Naruto, bearer of the Mongoose Hill contract. Leave the snakes to us. The Hokage gave a nod. Then you know what to do. Go do it. Hiruzen waved Tsunade over and shook his head as the three teenagers started their summoning. As he grumbled, I'm getting too old for this, I need you to succeed me. The invasion, a complete failure, was over. A young man and twice as many mongoose summons were waiting for the summoned vipers when they arrived at the wall. A sustained attack was suicidal given the wall's integrity and prepared defenses. A wave of surrenders started as the Auto Nin began to leave the Suna to their fate. Coordination was excellent with the squirrels acting as messengers, and the shinobi and mantis guards ensured the civilians' safety. Orochimaru stalked into his camp, wondering where he had gone wrong and what had gone wrong, and he thought back to a time long ago when Kabuto had sent him a boy who recovered quickly to test out. His anger became a laser, like hatred. Danzo had not anticipated Hiruzen and the Anbu to be waiting for him when he and his root soldiers came out of his secret base. Shimura Danzo, you are hereby under arrest for treason, to be exact, concealing resources and hindering the operations of Konoha shinobi in a time of war, Hiruzen said. Danzo swept out with his stolen eye and sought solace in his words. It made sense to say, no such state of war was declared. Until Danzo's genjutsu disintegrated after Hyuga Heishi hit multiple of his tenketsu, cutting off the chakra supply to his crippled arm and eye. An invasion by foreign shinobi obviates the need for such a declaration, absent invitations and authorizations from the Hokage. And they didn't have anything like that, Hiruzen stated, turning to Ibiki. He's high risk. Keep his chakras sealed, and his movements restricted. No visitors without the signature of the Hokage. In the stadium, the genin from the exams were gathered. The Suna inmates had been questioned, and negotiations had been held with those who possessed some real power. After examining the Suna Jinchuriki's seal, Jiraiya made some changes to strengthen it against the presence of the Biju. Now, Gaara could only be influenced by the Mad Demon if he allowed it. The Sandaime Hokage was shown them after reviewing the information and reports from the exams and the subsequent battle. Orochimaru had deceived them, and Hiruzen did not put too much pressure on them for compensation aside from a free hand to Dea because Suna's cage had, according to their own medical experts, been dead for more than 3 months before they discovered his body. Without their sensei, the Kumo group appeared a little disoriented, and the Iwa team was conspicuously missing. The Hokage was now making his decision, and those who had been in the hospital for different reasons were also present. It has been decided as part of the negotiations and peace settlements, that none of the Suna genin here today shall be promoted to Chunin at this time. Instead, they will be returned to their home under escort. They are forbidden entry to Hai no Kuni for a period of 2 years. Of the other participants, we have come to our decisions. First, we raise Kyoseki Koshi to the rank of Chunin, the only shinobi from beyond Konoha to achieve that result today. Next, from Konoha itself, we promote Aburame Shino, Hyuga Hinata, Nara Shikamaru and Uzumaki Naruto. Congratulations to all of you. Hiruzen inhaled deeply. Further, I take the chance on this occasion to step down and allow my successor, the Godem Hokage, to take my place. It seems I shall be known as the only Kage to ever retire. Twice. He raised his head and removed his hat. Senju Tsunade, I give you this burden, and the full authority therein, to guard our precious home, and the even more precious people who make it so. The female Sannin gritted her teeth and mumbled as she took the hat. You do remember I only agreed with this because you threatened to give the job to Jiraiya? There were rumors of the invasion and the Chunin exams in Konoha. Like all stories, it spread as more and more people heard it and told others about it. To find out why he was the only person from Iwa to be promoted and the only member of his team to return at all. A nervous Koshi who had been reluctant to leave his family was carefully questioned in Iwa. It would have been an understatement to say that the Tsuchikage was unhappy with the outcome, but he was powerless to punish the sole Chunin that the Konoha judges had supported. He wasn't alone, at least. A very irate Raikage was left to stare at the hole in his wall where he had thrown the messenger, a hole that had not existed prior to the messenger's throwing it in Kumogakure no Sato. The loyal Jonin sensei he had handpicked to protect the shinobi he had raised from kidnapped children turned out to be a deep cover spy and infiltrator, which was a major factor in the defect of a promising team of genin, in part due to that covert mission to obtain the Byakugan. He was enraged. He yelled, "Send me the Jinchuriki teams," saying, "I have a job for them." Kurenai gazed at the pile of Ryo she had acquired. She had forgotten about this wager, which was made to demonstrate her faith in her group. Now that she had it, she remembered the bookmaker who had given her odds of 1,000 to 1. With 50,000 Ryo, what was she going to do? Hyuga Heishi nodded as he glanced at the documents he had been completing. It was the only way to do this, even though he didn't like it. If he put it off for too long, some of the people who were interfering might decide to try again. After applying his seal and infusing it with his chakra signature, he signed the documents. A fortnight. Even though it wasn't long, it might be sufficient. When Kabuto opened his eyes, he saw that he was strapped to a hospital bed. His left leg and arms were bound, and he could feel it. The idiots. He started to channel his chakra scalpels to the free limb, wondering absently why they hadn't bound the other leg. Only to discover it was absent. The room was entered by a tall, scarred figure. Ibiki Morino. "Yakushi Kabuto," he said slowly, "I think you might have a few things we're interested in knowing." As the white-haired ninja's stomach sank. "And trust me, you will want to share them with us." As stoneworkers and sculptors started measuring and sketching to start work on the next phase to decorate this mountain, Team 8, along with their now wealthy sensei, sat on the 4th Hokage's head atop the Hokage monument. Life was good, they were all chunin, and they were all alive. As the sun sank over Konoha, Naruto held Hinata close while he gazed around and pondered the difficulties that lay ahead. Orochimaru was still out there, after all, and he wasn't the only individual or group that needed to be dealt with, however, for the time being. When Heishi cleared his throat, the new chunin and their sensei noticed. Heishi nodded to the latter, who smiled as her students walked up to the head of the Hyuga clan. Heishi didn't mince words when he talked. The village reverberated with Naruto's response. "The wedding is in how long?" When many Konoha residents reacted negatively to the chunin exams, Naruto felt intimidated, almost afraid. He had anticipated being in the spotlight as one of the few promotions for this event, but on a deep, fearful level, he was positive that people would think he had somehow cheated, that he had used the demon fox inside of him to steal the title from someone more worthy. However, Sasuke was being treated well by the people in the town, with the exception of some of his more extreme fangirls, such as Sakura and Ino, whose numbers had been reduced. He kept waiting for the other shoe to drop because this was a significant shift in their mindset. Taking note of the time, Naruto rushed forward. He had been called to see the Godem Hokage and her most important advisor, the former Sandame, before he had to meet his Hinata. Time for some enigmatic shopping of his own. This morning, Hinata was shopping with Ino, Sakura, and Tenten. He wondered why he was needed as he dashed across the rooftops toward the Hokage Tower. Otome was adopted informally rather than formally by Ishiguma Daikenshi, who had always detested his first name due to the rigid rules of Iwa. As Otome read from a scroll about the Hyaku Hoseki bloodline and traits, he sat in this waiting room, wondering how impressive this clan head would be for her family. Otome set down her scroll to observe the new chunin, whom she had encountered in the stadium, as he strode up to the desk. The little she had heard about him must have been a lie because she couldn't find any similarities between the two of them. However, then, he was able to stop her Kekkei Genkei, or more precisely, he made her stop it. Maybe she could give him the benefit of the doubt because she owed him something for that. Ishiguma gave a resigned grunt as the boy was handed over to see the Hokage, both the old and the new. Why a newly minted chunin, even one as strong as that one, was simply permitted to waltz in was beyond him. When the dark-haired girl with the pig told him that the Hokage would now see them, he assumed he must have missed the boy leaving. Upon entering, the two Iwanin discovered that they had not overlooked the chunin's departure. He remained here. The Godem, a mature woman, perhaps in her late 30s, rose from her chair, while the Sandame sat in a cozy chair to one side and behind the desk. The boy was standing, so the two chairs that were available would also appear to be comfortable. Tsunade nodded to the two of them. She gestured to each person as she named them, saying, Ishiguma.san, Otome.san, welcome. I believe everyone here at least knows of each other, but for completeness, allow me the introductions. I am Senju Tsunade, the Godem Hokage, known as the Queen of Slugs and Elixirs in some circles, and one of the Sannin. This is my advisor, Sarutobi Hiruzen, the former Sandaime Hokage, now retired once again, also known variously as the Professor and the God of Shinobi. Finally we have Uzumaki Naruto, our latest Chunin, and head of the Uzumaki clan, of which the Hyaku Hoseki blood was one of 3 cadet lines. Ishiguma was struck with a searing realization as the facts began to sink in. In order for Otome to be adopted, they weren't present. She was already a blood relative of the clan. In order for her to adopt him, they were here. He thought frantically and said, "Wait a moment, please. If I am correct," he continued after a few seconds, "then you wish to adopt me into this clan, yes? I am uncertain what I can offer you. Are you certain you wish to do this?" Rising, Naruto bowed. He had known exactly what was required once he had been told that this girl was family. Ishiguma-san, everyone has been tiptoeing around this issue, but what you say is true. As Otome is part of the Uzumaki by blood, and sees you as her father, then it makes sense that you also join the clan. All you need to offer is to keep being her dad. But before you accept, there is information you must both be made aware of. 2 things actually. They were now paying attention to what Naruto had said. Hiruzen and Tsunade from the information the boy had discovered aside from being the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki, and Ishiguma and Otome from curiosity about what might make them reconsider. The first piece of information, Naruto stated, is that I am the prison of the Kyuubi no Yoko. The second is that my father caused that scar. Tsunade was not much better, and Hiruzen was stunned. Otome gaped for a long time, looking from her father to herself and back again. A cousin, kinsman, she was unsure of the best term. Ishiguma, however, was closely examining the Chunin, who was essentially a boy. Yes, there were parallels. He has enough of his mother in him, but they are not a perfect match. His mom, she must have been the Crimson Blade, Uzumaki Kushina, whom Kumo and Iwa both feared. He had to be certain, though. He questioned, "Who told you this?" "No. 1, answered Naruto. "I figured it out quite a while ago, and it was independently confirmed by those with reason to know. Besides, if the Hokage monument was in color, the whole village would have seen it long ago." Hinata quietly explained why she needed their assistance while standing in the middle of the group. "And so, you see, I'll be marrying Naru-kun in 2 weeks' time. I need your help." She gave a slight bow. "My father has made arrangements for the formal kimono, but I need advice and assistance in other ways. Kurenai Sensei has agreed to stand in for my mother and..." Tenten gave a nod. "You need your attendance, but can't figure out how to ask." Hinata nodded despite blushing slightly in embarrassment. "I don't want to seem arrogant, or like I think I'm above you or anything. It's just, this is important to me, it's for Naru-kun. Ino gave a headshake. When she said, "It's your big day too, Hinata, so keep that in mind, alright. Now, let's start with the shopping. Lingerie first, that's over there." It had taken a long time to tell the entire story. Otome had been so taken aback that she had started crying. At least she had her father, even though she had been unable to touch people in a meaningful way. Before the kidnapping, the changes brought about by the experiments, the suffering from those, the alienation. Naruto's closest contact as a child had been the Hokage, a busy man who couldn't dedicate all of his time to watching out for the boy. A lesser person would have given up long ago, she was certain. Additionally, this council. About this CRA. They can't force it on someone, can they? The Hokage gave a nod. "That's why I consider it a particularly vile piece of work. I don't have quite the support I need to overthrow it and remove it yet. Removing Danzo helped, but I really need another seat from the council to get it. A seat that Naruto isn't old enough to vote." It was not pleasant to see Ishiguma's smile in a dimly lit alley. It was nearly savage. "Whereas I, should the head of my clan so choose, can stand as proxy. That's how I can repay him. Now, how do we do this?" Shino smiled as his parents' eyebrows shot up when he handed them the invitation. The Aburame were rarely invited to formal events like this wedding, but they were present in some of the most exquisite calligraphy they had ever seen. Shibi looked over at his son. "You believe we should go?" Shino gave a nod. "They are my team. Mates. They wish to share this day with my family. I doubt that either will be able to pay attention to anyone else, but we will be seen to be there. It is good for our clan, and I get to support my best friends outside my colonies." The conclusion is inescapable. Tamari and Kankuro looked into their brother's room in Sanagakure no Sato. Fearing more torture for some poor soul, they had been pulled through the house to find Gaara by that awful, irritating noise that sounded like sawing logs. However, he was lying with his eyes closed, snoring, and the awful sound was coming from his sleeping body. On the bridge where he was supposed to meet Hinata, Naruto stood. He had things to consider, but he was early. He now had an uncle and cousin, and integrating family into his life was made easier by Ishiguma and Otome's insistence on adopting the clan name as their own. Fresh. He struggled to comprehend how these total strangers could feel so confused, as if everything were twisted to the side. As the leader of the Uzumaki clan, they were so devoted to him that they would swear. Uzumaki aren't sealed against their own choice, was his first statement. The newly christened Uzumaki Ishiguma then grinned even more broadly. He grinned. That meant there were now 2 more guests for the groom's side of the ceremony. There was, after all, a silver lining. He concluded that there was a fate worse than death. As Kujaku Dansei measured and fitted Naruto for the formal kimono, Neji watched. It was this. With a wry, self-deprecating smile, the once fate-obsessed boya who admitted to himself that his behavior toward his family was not a man's attitude stared at the young man, saying that Naruto's title could not be denied. While some elders remained adamant about this issue, Uzumaki had largely disregarded their concerns after the Chunin exams. Ironically, the man who had once called for Naruto's death was also one of his most ardent supporters. How did he put it again? Corrupting the heiress and weakening her resolve and abilities, indeed. It goes without saying that the weak girl in question was headed toward becoming the strongest kunoichi in her generation. Obviously, giving someone clear sight required more than just the Byakugan. The house they had ended up in caught the attention of the 3 young Kumo genin. A distinct crane motif was used to decorate it. As they waited for the person they were meant to meet, they noticed a particular portrait. His hair was almost silver, and he resembled their sensei in some ways, but he was older. A recognizable voice spoke up behind them as they looked. My great-grandfather, Tsuru Tetsu. They turned and saw their sensei's familiar features, but in unfamiliar clothing. The silver, trimmed blue of his clothing fit him better than the gray and black he'd worn in Kumo, and the crane motif was extended here. He appeared to be. For a brief moment, they were unable to understand why they were happier and more at ease. Then it dawned on him. He was at home. They took up their seats at his invitation. They nodded, and he went on, let's start at the beginning, shall we? A bit under a decade ago, Kumo's current raikage came to power, and decided that the way to make Kumo stronger was to take in the people of other nations. An admirable goal on paper, but his method of applying the principle was less so. He started by abducting children from other villages, usually the smaller villages, but then he saw the power in the bloodlines that Kiri was persecuting, and started expanding his plans. After successfully abducting children from other nations under the guise of diplomatic relations, he set his sights on the Byakugan. At that time I was simply Tsuru Shikinshi, a name I have once again taken, and when the main plan failed he began to make noises of war to claim the body of the killer. The Hyuga instead gave him the body of the killer's twin, but I realized that this would not satisfy him. So I went to Hokage Sama with a plan, to infiltrate Kumo, and investigate these things. With the distraction caused by the detonation of the explosive tags I left all over that body. And so began the life of Sagigiso. Sakura sighed as her body caught up to her movements and she turned to face the targets. It was just not good enough that only 2/3 of her kunai had hit the mark. She looked into the darkness. She was getting better more quickly than she had anticipated, and there was still time for another round. Perhaps if she sought advice from Sasuke, it wouldn't strain his chakra, and he was the best at this back in the academy, after all. Maybe it would help if he felt useful. Lately, he just seemed so down. As their shadow clones engaged in a fierce battle, Naruto and Hinata stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching. Since each of them had only produced 5 clones, they leaned against one another and sighed as the final one vanished and they both regained the memories. Another draw, said Naruto. Hinata. Haim gave a nod. She possessed accuracy and efficiency, while he possessed vast amounts of chakra. They couldn't figure out who would have prevailed in that final battle in the exams, but it was balanced. They had wondered, though it was annoying. It had been a busy week, and now all that remained was waiting. Hinata was impatient to be able to call herself Naru, Kun's wife, and was growing tired of waiting. The only disruption in the entire 2-week period would be the night before the ceremony, and they were fully aware of the reason Kurenai's sensei was sleeping so close to them. She was unable to spend that night with her intended because, according to tradition, she had to take a ritual bath to cleanse herself and prepare for the new life. The two had expressed their worries about the recurrence of their nightmares. Those two reported that their weekly therapy sessions with the Yamanakas were going well, but Naruto had heard Inoichi say something to his wife. How that boy has gone through all that and not broken, I'll never know. I'm surprised that Konoha is still here sometimes, what with all that has been done to him. Haruno Mebuki had spent the entire night searching the archives for a means to implement the CRA and overturn the Kyuubi brat's promotion decision. After she moved past the entire situation involving the Uchiha, her daughter would be ideal. But why did she have a sneaking suspicion that this was incorrect? She walked confidently into the council chamber, ignoring the small voice objecting to this course of action. Despite their protests, the elders Homura and Kaharu had been relieved of their burdens by the Godem Hokage, who replaced them with the former Sandame. The vote was tied as a result of that and Danzo's imprisonment, but Mebuki was confident she could turn it around with this small piece of legislation. She scowled as she walked past the big man with the ruby eye and scar wearing a black kimono with orange trim that had Uzumaki spirals over his heart and on his shoulders and back. An outfit that was exclusive to Uzumaki. The stone bear has been in Uzumaki since when? The Godem glanced at the suggested agenda for today's meeting and snorted as the clanless shinobi counselor sat down and split the thick stack of documents in two. Several of the shinobi clans gave courteous applause. Tsunade said, "Today's agenda has not been sent to my office for confirmation," warning them to stop and ask why that was a bad idea. Nobody did. So today runs to my agenda. Item 1. The Uzumaki clan has accepted one Uzumaki Otome into their ranks, and has extended a clan adoption to her father. By choice, Uzumaki Ishiguma. Citing his age and lack of experience in dealing with politics, Uzumaki Naruto has given his proxy to his newly adopted uncle. This is not a request, as the clan's business is just that, it is a notification. As a further notice, with this expansion, Uzumaki Naruto is no longer the last male of his clan, and thus the CRA no longer applies. The voice in the back of Mebuki's mind became louder and began to cheer as she was stunned. She pushed it back with effort, but now she was beginning to get a migraine. The pain was broken by Tsunade's voice. Tsunade's passion for the topic was contagious. Item 2 is the abolishment of the abomination known as the Clan Restoration Act. It is nothing less than legalized slavery, and I will have nothing like it in my Konoha. Ishiguma grinned a pledge at the civilian council and cast his vote with the other shinobi clans as requested by the Hokage, who remembered that this law might have applied to his daughter, and a number of them supported the repeal as well. But those who did flinched in agony as headaches appeared out of the blue. Negative ones. Tsunade took notice. Until certain issues can be ironed out, she stated, I will not be convening the council. Until then, you can all rest easy. Dismissed. She turned to Shizune after they had departed. Get word to Jiraiya, she advised, and quietly make sure that I'm the one to do the check-ups on the counselor's medicals. And bump up those medicals to just after the wedding. The boarder caught Ai's attention. The Raikage gave the orders, but he was positive this was a bad idea. The typical assassination team consisted of 3 Chunin working under a Jonin, but for Konoha, he had seen a few of the reports that the Kumo agents had returned. Abiju had been stopped by one of their genin, who, admittedly, was later made Chunin, but at the time he was still a genin. He gave a headshake. At times, he believed his father must be becoming senile. This one seemed to be one of them. He took a deep breath and examined his team. B was there. He called himself Killer B. He was the younger brother of I. Adopted by the Raikage, who appeared to have a severely limited creative imagination when it came to names. The Hachibi, a hideous cross between an octopus and an ox, had B as its Jinchuriki. As B himself had once described it, it was an ox. To puss. Killer B was persuaded that a moniker like that for one of the most powerful things on the planet was disrespectful after listening to classical music for 12 hours straight. The young person had developed a rap addiction somewhere along the line. But it should be pronounced with an invisible C at the beginning until he figured out how to balance the rhyme schemes and rhythm. Then Ni Yugito appeared. She had never paid much attention to authority and had always been an independent person. She may have been influenced by the Nibi no Nekomato within herself, but there may have been other factors at play as well. She and B were only on the same team because it was simpler to monitor them that way. According to rumors, the girl wore gloves all the time to prevent her death touch from killing people. However, nobody was certain. The team's final member was a twin brother who, thanks to a special jutsu, was able to communicate ideas, memories, and even their senses over hundreds of miles. He was a spy for this team, not Konoha, and he used his brother to inform the Raikage of everything that was happening. I gave a headshake. By the way he carried himself, you would have assumed the man was a Uchiha because of his haughty and superior demeanor. A long time ago, Kokura Ichiro would have had a accident. if he had known how to do it without being discovered. Furthermore, if they were unsure of the identity of the Konoha Jinchuriki, how were they to kill them? Otome glanced around. At least for the time being, this was her team. She gave the others a bow. "My name is Uzumaki Otome," she stated. "I am new to Konoha, so please, excuse any ignorance I display." The blonde girl beside the larger boy nodded. "You're Naruto's cousin, aren't you? I'm Yamanaka Ino, and this is Akamichi Choji. Our sensei is Sodaidora Shinshi. He said he'd be here later, and to show you where and how we train." Naruto didn't experience any nightmares the night before their wedding. Rather, he and his beloved Hinata Haim held a kind of vigil during their separate time, reflecting on how they came to be together and what life would bring them. The young shinobi, forced by circumstance to mature far too quickly, watched as a candle burned while gazing meditatively into its flame. When he realized that he had been up all night, it was strangely refreshing. He had carefully examined each of the questions, uncertainties, and fears that he had discovered. He came up with his own answers, and the following morning he dressed in the formal kimono he had bought with Neji and Hinata's help. Under the white haori, or sleeveless coat, which featured the red spirals on the back and over the heart, he wore striking black wide-legged pants, a black kimono with orange trim and the white spiral of Uzumaki on each shoulder, and the clan's new emblem, an orange spiral, on the obi around his waist. Naruto was anxious and he was afraid that Hinata would change her mind as he strode past the guests, which included the newest members of his clan as well as a few others like Kakashi, Jiraiya, and Iruka. However, all of Naruto's thoughts vanished like snow in an active volcano as her father escorted her into the room. To symbolize the breaking of ties with her former family, the bride wore the traditional tanto, a pure white formal kimono with a cloth covering her head like a hood, and pale makeup. The thin red silk line that was visible at the edges was a second kimono that would be unveiled following the ceremony, marking the bride's sort of rebirth and new life. Because the red kimono would have the Uzumaki spirals, the white kimono would have the Hyuga's emblems. They must have been paying enough attention to get by, responding appropriately in the appropriate places, and before they realized it, the white kimono was taken off and Tsunade Sama, in her office as Hokage, was declaring them married. The ceremony was a blur aside from their faces when she first saw him, and allowing them to share a kiss. They were both so intent on one another. They discovered that Kurenai's futon had been moved when it was time for them to go to bed. Even though they had anticipated it, it was somewhat shocking that their sensei no longer thought they required a chaperone. Dropping a garment every few feet, the two moved across the bedroom until they were in bed, kissing passionately, not realizing they had been waiting for it, and turning off the lights as they collapsed into each other's arms. Two men wearing black cloaks embroidered with red clouds stood on a hill outside Konoha, looking down on the gates, waiting for dawn, when the gates would reopen. They had witnessed some celebrations' fireworks. It was unlikely that they would continue to celebrate after the Chunin exams had been over for 2 weeks, and had made the decision to hold off until morning. After all, it was easier to deal with shinobi who were hungover. To register the last documents for their marriage, Naruto and his new bride showed up at the Hokage Tower. Forms for Hinata's change of address. Many shinobi and many civilians were a little hungover from the previous night's festivities, which had apparently not been limited to the Hyuga estate. For the time being, the happy couple chose to see what their fellow rookies had been up to, putting an end to the fears of bureaucracy. Naruto questioned, "So where to first?" The newlyweds had decided not to go on a honeymoon because they knew they would be in high demand and wanted to be ready for the Hokage whenever he needed them. He now took the same course of action as many sage husbands throughout history. It matters what your wife thinks. Shino will be helping his family with their hives and unattached Kakaichu colonies. I think his little sister Shikibu is supposed to be getting her first colony in about a month or so. So he'll be busy today. Ino was going to visit Sakura, and probably train with her. Hinata's choice took a while to come. Kiba? Naruto gave a headshake. Nah. It's Friday, and he's not on a mission, so he has to clean the Inuzuka dog runs today. He cleans himself well, but I can smell it. What about Shikamaru? It was Hinata's turn to dismiss a notion. As they wandered down the street, they found themselves in front of the academy, where the students, including Konohamaru and his friends Moegi and Udon, as well as Hannaby, who was on the opposite side of the group from the others, were setting in to spar with each other. He did have a mission today. Apparently he's the ambassador Hokage. Sama is sending to Suna to keep an eye on the treaty. It seems they still haven't chosen a Godem Kazekage yet, too many factions, and Tsunade. Sama is hoping he can find the one best suited to the job. The newest and possibly most well known Chunin in the village briefly made the ninja cadets smile, but then their attention was diverted to something or someone behind the couple. In response to whatever had almost severed his head, Naruto instinctively ducked, even as Hinata leapt upward, to briefly balance on Naruto's hand before being flung into the air. As far as the majority of people could see, anyway. Two men in black cloaks with red clouds on them stood in the center of the street. The one on the right was taller and carried what appeared to be a two-handed sword in one hand, though it was difficult to tell because of how heavily bandaged it was. There was no better way to describe the man than strange. The blue color of his skin, the gill-like marks on his face, the black sclera of his eyes, the golden iris and the lifeless-looking pupil. There was something killer about this man. Killer is not accurate. Naruto and Hinata were aware that they could kill if necessary. To hell with anything else. This man was the kind of psychopath who would cut you just to watch you bleed. Although the other man's face was hidden by his wide-brimmed hat, there was something dangerous about Hima, the ability to not only kill but to keep doing so until the victim was pleading for it. Uzumaki Naruto, his voice was dead, you will be coming with us, or we will kill your friend here, and then those children, one by one, while you won't be able to stop us. Other people in the streets shook their heads as these two strangers seemingly appeared out of nowhere, and Naruto snorted as he and Hinata assumed fighting stances. The shorter of the two reached for his hat as the civilians withdrew and the academy teachers rushed to enter the academy building with the cadets. Remember Kisame, the leader wants him alive. And we don't have much time before they come for us. The man with the shark's features smiled, his teeth sharp as a line of shattered bottles. Don't worry, I don't think taking off his legs so he can't run is going to kill him, he replied. The Hokage was startled into acute, agonizing consciousness by a hammering on the door of Tsunade's rooms. The bottle in front of her was once filled with premium shochu, the more potent cousin of sake, but it was now empty. The hammering would definitely be explained by that. The Godem Hokage realized that the pounding wasn't just in her head when she saw Jiraiya slowly raise his head from the couch across from her. She stumbled to her feet and headed for the door, even as her old friend went to the kitchen to brew coffee. She yanked the door open and gave the frightened Chunin outside a fierce look. What is it? I warn you, if it's not important, I'll have you busted back to the academy so fast. Hokage. Sama. The ninja interrupting in a panicked voice. As the ninja prepared for the response, Jiraiya dropped the coffee cups on her way out the window, the Hokage shouting orders back over her shoulder as she followed. Uchiha Itachi and Hoshigaki Kisame. They're here in Konoha, outside the academy. I think they're after the Uzumaki couple. Get all available Jonin on capture crews, and call out Hunter.nin in case we aren't in time. I want all Anbu to drop what they're doing, whatever it is, and assemble for interception. And let the hospital know we'll need more beds. Even as his wife, he couldn't stop calling Hinata that, moved to stop the other missing .nin. Naruto said to the shark. Like man in front of him, I don't suppose you let us take this somewhere you can't threaten innocent bystanders? Kisame responded by swinging the enormous sword once more. Judging by Kisame's technique, Naruto surmised that this was what was beneath the bandages. It didn't really help to sidestep as the weapon descended because the blade moved and twisted to hit him anyhow. Even as he extended his claws, Naruto's reaction was to pour a measure of chakra into his bones, bringing the bone metal plating to his shoulder in time to catch the blow that sent him to his knees. His opponent's eyes widened at the sudden extension of his bone metal as the sword struck, and the man jumped back to avoid the slash that accompanied the claws. Well, the missing nin muttered, that's something new. He swept the blade once more, this time aiming for soft tissue, saying, Hey, Itachi, I think your agents are slipping. They didn't tell us about this. Nobody could deny that he picked things up quickly, and even as he pushed wind and lightning chakra into his crossed claws, Naruto caught the blade of the Samahata sword as it swept across, aiming for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's abdomen. Arashi no Sume! Shouted the underage shinobi. Claws of the storm. The method has worked well on large swords in the past, the new Chunin reasoned, so why tamper with a winning combination? Uchiha said, you have bitten off more than you can chew, girl, as a rebel. Hinata threw her chakra into her Byakugan, assuming he was going to use a genjutsu. Even as Itachi spoke the name of his dreaded technique, Hinata watched, not the physical world, but the chakra flowing. It is unfortunate, but I will have to finish this before we can be interrupted. But that doesn't mean I can't take my time with this. Tsukiyomi. Despite the obvious distortions, she was trapped in an illusion, a vast and intricate construct. Itachi felt compelled to give her a lecture. The Byakugan is a most wonderful tool for piercing deception, he said, holding an unsheathed katana as he approached the girl who was chained to a cross. "You're going to die, and this is going to hurt. Eventually. Despite having the Byakugan, you are powerless here. The Mangekyo Sharingan is merely another method of controlling your senses. We'll take the Kyuubi from your little boyfriend and he'll join you after we're done here, and I'll leave your body in the street. In passing away. Furthermore, there is nothing you can do about it." The Byakugan allowed her to see the chakra flow, and she was in a lucid state, with some control of the shifts, or she would not have been able to feel the pain that Itachi obviously wanted her to. If he'd had that much control over the illusory world, he'd not have bound her. Hinata forced her attention away from his voice and instead concentrated on Kurenai Sensei's lectures about Genjutsu and what little the Jonin had said about the Sharingan's illusions. "This Genjutsu's subjective time will last 70.2 hours, 3 days, Itachi repeated, adding that it was only 1 minute. Now. He lifted his katana once more. She couldn't move her hands to form hand seals, so she'd have to do this without them. In the real world, this would be impossible, since she didn't have the necessary chakra reserves, and probably wouldn't for years, or even decades, if ever. However, here, in a world that was pure illusion and chakra that was just begging to be shaped, Hinata was so close to breaking this. Naruto was clearly fighting out there, and he was fighting for her. She would fight for him, for their future. A gentle pulse of chakra ran through her abdomen as she considered that future, of their children as yet unborn, or even conceived. For them. The sons and daughters for her Naru-kun to teach and spoil. Kisame leapt backwards and landed on the fence across from the academy, where he stared at the bleeding wound in his sword and let the liquefied chakra spill onto the ground, where it hissed and steamed away. He could see where Samahata had struck the boy's arm, laying it to the bone metallic bone, but even as he watched, the wound was closing, healing over, and filling out beneath the crusted blood. It obviously hurt, but it would not slow the boy down for long. He'd need an edge. His gaze fell on the academy yard, and he saw a girl who looked a lot like the one Itachi had trapped in his genjutsu. He would have threatened her because she was clearly important to him, but he was now between them. With a single leap, Kisame leapt the fence and used Samahata's hilt to drive the teacher with the scar on his face back as he reached for the girl. What he didn't anticipate was the boy, a scarf-wearing brat who hadn't even received his Hite.8, racing between them and driving a kunai into the outstretched arm. Based on Kisame's experience, the wound wasn't too serious, and he was able to pull back the arm before it got any worse. He thrust across with Samahata, a glance that at best, tearing the brat's shirt and giving his chest the appearance of someone sledding on gravel. Even as the girl yelled the name of her classmate, or was it the name of the village? The killing intent that exploded behind him froze him to the spot. Kisame had other things to worry about, so he forced himself to look back at the boy, who was little more than a child, from which this menacing presence originated. That was a mistake, Uzumaki Naruto growled. Even though it was pointless, Itachi was somewhat intrigued by this child's strategy and would allow her to try. If she failed, he would have to punish her for trying, but he would still show her respect in the process. The first step, rotation, was easy enough. The second, power, was easy to obtain here. She just took it from the genjutsu surrounding them, and the third, and final, was control, which any half-trained Hyuga, and at least one Uzumaki, now, had in spades. Hinata struggled with it, focusing her clear-headed mind on the patterns she'd seen Naruto use a few times. As she fell to her feet and the sword, or rather the image of a sword, rose, she focused on the very real feelings of the previous night and the inevitable future in which she would be nursing her children and would not let go, screaming out as she launched her illusory assault, making up the name on the spot. Uzumaki hidden technique. Razanento, spiral mind. All the power of Itachi's own genjutsu was forced to feed back into his own Sharingan because the spiraling spheres were just as illusory as the rest of the Sharingan-enforced genjutsu. And that was exactly the problem. By putting himself in the genjutsu, Itachi had made himself vulnerable in a way he had never thought possible, and the twisting rotating energy of an attack he had never thought was passed on stripped away the illusion's substance. Jiraiya thought he had arrived too late when he heard the screams of pain and agony as he landed and saw Hinata collapse to her knees, only to see Itachi Uchiha clutching at the ruins of his eyes as they exploded outwards across his face. He glanced toward Naruto and saw him drive Hoshigaki Kisame back into a corner, his sword badly damaged and with a few wounds here and there, while Naruto's own injuries lasted only a few seconds. As the newly made Chunin maneuvered his foe into a position where no one was behind him, he saw the body of Sarutobi Konohamaru lying on the ground in front of a shocked and silent Hyuga Hannaby. No, she was whispering the boy's name repeatedly. This stranger's attack on Konohamaru infuriated Naruto, and his attempt to kidnap Naruto's new sister. Law was, according to the Uzumaki ideology he was putting together, unforgivable. As he continued the attack, he mentally reached out to the one deep inside of him. He addressed the Kyuubi directly, mind.to, mind, saying, Kyuubi no Yoko, I don't have your name, but I ask for a little of your chakra, and the Kyuubi hesitated. These strangers came to our home and threatened us, so we fought, and they threatened the village children, and I need to stop this one before he hurts another child. Never again. He injured a friend who is, if not blood, a little brother. The Kyuubi stretched a bit more chakra through the seal and said, Be ready, Kit. This is going to hurt. Additionally, you who defend your people's kits and younglings. I'm Kurama. Naruto didn't have time to reply because the flow of Yuki, or chakra, into his body hurt like a whole body gravel rash dipped in salt water. He had to focus to direct this energy to the right place. None of the shinobi who were arriving missed the red chakra flare that covered Naruto's body. All of the rookies and their senseis saw it. The killing intent that Naruto had been expressing became more intense, but there was an unnaturally precise control to it, as Tsunade, Hannaby, and Konohamaru didn't even feel a flutter of nervousness, and Hinata didn't either, but that was because she knew, on a level so profound that it was impossible to shake, that Naruto was this frightening to those who threatened his precious ones. Kisame brought up Samahata to block, roaring out as he did so. The red aura condensed, merging with his own blue chakra to create a vivid purple color. This energy was directed into the Rasengan's spiraling orb as he struck forward with his left claws and forced the barely contained purple orb into his right claws. Rasenjutsu. Demon Strike. Uzumaki no Sume. Samahata lasted only a few seconds before the spiraling, wild energy of the chakra. Enhanced claws tore away at the blade, drilling a huge hole with 3 ridges on it, top and bottom, and then continuing outwards through the body behind the sword, leaving a similar, albeit slightly larger hole through Kisame's chest and grinding 3 gouges from the sparring field, across the street, and through the wall on the far side. The sheer amount of energy released was so great that even Jiraiya was rendered speechless by the incident. Naruto turned, his claws retracting into his arms with a hiss of heated metal, searching for Hinata, and even as Shell. Shocked Danbu took the renegade Uchiha into custody, weighing him down with chakra restraints. He walked a little unsteadily to his Hinata, and embraced her, as the two almost fell against a nearby wall. While Hannaby ran to her sister and gave her a hug while sobbing out loud, Konohamaru was taken right away to the hospital so that the trainee medic. Nin could repair the skin on his chest. This was going to be Jigoku's own paperwork, the Hokage thought, surveying the damage, Kisame's body, and the Anbu hauling their prisoner away. As he peered through the binoculars at the scene of that fight, Ai's right eye was starting to twitch noticeably, and he heard a low whistle. The chakra powered devices he and his team carried had allowed them to watch the fight as if from a nearby rooftop, but they were actually standing in the park above the Hokage monument. B's rap hit a more grating nerve than usual, but Yugito didn't call him out on it for once, instead using the older Jinchuriki's lingo. Yo, bro, I think we know where they Jinchuriki's at, but I ain't willin' ta fight the brat. Word, she said, removing her gaze from her own binoculars and turning to face the third Chunin. Ichiro's face was focused as he told his brother Nijiro the news, and then he went pale. He stated, we cannot allow Konoha to retain such an asset, and Raikage advises against aborting. While primary is crucial, secondary targets are opportunities. Nijiro sighed at the expressionless faces of his team, saying, fuck that for a game of soldiers, he wants to live. One of the main disadvantages of our family jutsu is how closely it links our life forces. Both of them die. He and I both dislike the idea that we are disposable. Before turning away from Konoha, I was evaluating the situation and gathering as much information as he could. The quality of current intelligence assets has been called into question by preliminary reconnaissance. A number of issues have been brought up concerning the target's present capabilities. Recently, both the target and his teammate have made Chunin, and while their opponents most likely underestimated them, they did defeat 2 S-rank missing. Nin. As team leader, I believe that in order to remove a threat to Kumogakure, we must first withdraw, gather more intelligence, and then review our plans. They were with him, and even though Ichiro, who was new to the field, hadn't noticed it, they had noticed that their leader hadn't made clear the precise threat he was thinking of. Ichiro was too busy relaying Ai's report to notice the glance that went from B to Yugito as I said this. They nodded to each other, and then to Ai. As the Anbu carried him away, Sasuke stared at his brother, feeling the curse mark nudging at his desire for vengeance, trying to amplify it to the point where he would act madly for the power. However, Itachi had just had his eyes blown out by a Hyuga, and based on his screams at the time, the injury of that far outweighed the physical loss. He fought off the urge to pull out a kunai and attack his brother, reasoning that he would let him marinate in his own suffering for a while. He nearly missed Kakashi Sensei's presence until the one-eyed Jonin spoke. As his pupil shuddered in anger and bloodlust, Kakashi remarked, "Sasuke, maybe you should look at it like this. Maybe the best way to get revenge on Itachi is to render him unimportant. To remark, you haven't affected me, and you don't deserve enough of my time to disgrace you." The young Uchiha remarked, "I hadn't thought of it like that, sensei." Sakura looked at Naruto and then at the damage he had caused. It was terrifying to think that she had once been willing to provoke someone who was capable of doing that. Fortunately, Naruto didn't harbor resentment because otherwise, she would have something to be afraid of. She looked through the gashes in the wall across from the academy's sparring field, where the gouges had continued for another 5 feet, destroying half of a picnic table in the backyard, and then she looked back at Naruto, who was curled up in Hinata's arms. And she goes to bed with him. She thought, wondering how it happened that the shyest girl in their year had turned into the bravest kunoichi. 2 of the Akatsuki arrived today, her father said in a grim tone to his gravelly voice, and they were apparently here for Naruto. Sama. Otome looked up as he entered the yard that their house shared with Naruto's. The red-haired girl literally turned white as she covered her mouth with her hands. She had raised her keke genke and was about to go to war to save her cousin when her father's raised hand stopped her while he was still talking. Neither of us would have had a chance because it was Uchiha and Hoshigaki, Otome-chan. It's okay before you start raising an army. Both Naruto and Hinata have already returned to their own residence. So the Anbu arrived in time, or the Hokage herself, and Jiraiya. Sama? Otome sighed in relief as her skin of stone withdrew. Hi, Otome-chan, Naruto, Sama, and Hinata. Sama stopped the top pair of the Akatsuki unaided. Ishiguma said, shaking his head. They did manage a timely arrival, but by the time they did, it was all over. He paused to enjoy the puzzled expression on her face and then the widening of her eyes as she realized exactly what that meant. I'm quite pleased with my new clan. Otome nodded as she fell back into the seat. She was a very fortunate kunoichi if her cousin was that strong. The messenger was cooling quickly on the floor of Orochimaru, and the man, if the word could be accurately described, was now destroying things in a towering rage. He had never been able to defeat Uchiha Itachi, and now some half-grown girl had not only beaten him, but also destroyed his eyes in the process. He started to calm down as he threw another glass jar filled with some body parts taken from his experiments, scattering the organs soaked in formaldehyde throughout the room. He had been doing this for 5 minutes, and the only thing it was getting him was fewer research materials. Perhaps he could persuade them of a mutual advantage, a common objective. This would require skill. He sat on his throne and thought back to the circumstances of his own departure from the group that had just lost its 2 best members. Itachi heard a familiar voice and woke up, but his eyes refused to open. The easy way, which is very easy, the hard way, which is. I've been hoping to have a little chat with you, Uchiha Itachi, Morino Ibiki said. Not so much, then there's my method. Konohamaru opened his eyes in his hospital room. His chest still ached, but it felt much better than when that shark-freak had hit him. His only clothing was his boxers, which were swathed in bandages, and he had a few small scrapes on his arms, nothing major, but they had also been treated and gleamed with the appearance of fresh ointment. He was not alone in this room either. He looked at the chairs next to his bed and saw his grandfather leaning back in one, sleeping, and Naruto with Hinata in his lap in the other, both of whom appeared to be quite exhausted, but Naruto's eyes were open, and he nudged Hinata into waking up. Although he didn't entirely understand why the two had married so young, he had been a guest at the wedding, standing as a member of the groom's family, and the dancing had been kind of nice, even if he was new to it. Don't worry, Kono-kun, Naruto assured him. We were only allowed in if we kept an eye on you for the nurses, and there's someone else out there who wanted to know when you woke up. Hinata stood up as she wiped the sleep from her eyes, and Naruto tapped the former Hokage on his shoulder as his wife left the room. As his grandfather embraced him, Konohamaru wondered what he meant. You did well, Kono-kun, the elderly man said, his eyes welling with tears. You made me proud, although you need to work on your defensive skills. The boy said, okay, Oji-san, looking to Naruto for assistance. The older boy simply shook his head, indicating that he was on his own, and turned to face the door, where Hinata was standing with the girl Konohamaru had danced with the night before, the same girl he had just reacted to save today. Hyuga Hannaby walked carefully up to the bed, stopping right next to the boy who had saved her life and leaning over to kiss his cheek while he was still in shock, as it seemed everyone in the room was, even though she knew that her 2-san was behind her. Hinata was present, and so were many others. "Thank you for saving me, Konohamaru," she whispered to him. "Last night's dance was enjoyable to me as well. Call me Hana-chan, please." She fled with a perplexed father at her heels, and Konohamaru, still sitting in shock on the bed, slowly raised his hand to the cheek she had touched, asking, "Naruto.ni.san, why'd she do that?" Turning to his surrogate big brother, he inquired, "And why did she flee?" "Well, I'm not the best person to ask," Naruto said, collecting his jumbled thoughts, looking around at the suddenly attentive faces, eager to see him explain the minefield of relationships to the younger boy. "I mean, she's Hinata's sister, she's known her longer, and Gigi Sama here has been around for years." Naruto's excuses were dismissed by Konohamaru, who said, "Yeah, but you're the one I can understand when you tell me stuff." Hiruzen laughed, Hinata choked back a laugh, and Naruto sighed. "All right, then," he said, "I'll try it out. Isn't Hannaby essentially a princess?" "Well, when the princess was attacked by a monster, the brave little ninja came out of nowhere to save her, so she wanted to thank you," he explained after Konohamaru nodded. "She wanted to give you something significant so you would know she was appreciative and that she would never forget what you did for her after you were hurt while rescuing her. She then kissed you. However, she fled because she was afraid you wouldn't like it and didn't want to know if you did." "Okay, I can see that," Konohamaru said, unconsciously imitating Naruto's thinking pose with his chin in his fingers, even as he remembered some of the girls in the academy yard trying to do the same. Not that he'd ever let them get close, it didn't feel nice the way they were hunting him. There were only 2 girls in his year that weren't trying to do this to him. Hannaby, who was usually apart from the rest in class, and Moegi, whom he saw as a sister substitute, a good friend who just so happened to be a girl. Even though she looked at Udon a lot, he didn't realize he was touching his cheek again, nor that he spoke aloud when he murmured, "Pleasant." Even though he and Hinata were spending a significant amount of daylight hours training even harder, the next few days as Konohamaru recovered were pleasant because the bounties that had accumulated on Itachi and Kisame were substantial and were used to improve the estate and the finances of the new Uzumaki clan. Hinata's gravity seals had been increased to 4, even though his had reached 6, and they were working on adding other jutsu and improving their fighting style. A course of action Otome and Ishiguma were more than happy to assist with. The former Team 8, now known as Team Kurenai, was summoned to the Hokage's office with the Godem Hokage and her advisor almost a week after the incident involving the 2 Akatsuki agents. Yamanaka Inoichi and Morino Ibiki welcomed them. "We have received these from an agent in Kumogakure no Sato," Tsunade said, setting 2 books on the desk in front of her. These were bingo books, which were collections of bounties placed on various ninja by the hidden villages. Each of the 5 great villages published its own, and a few others were shared by several smaller villages. The 2 books in question were from Iwa and Kumo, respectively. Iwa's was expected, of course, with prices on the heads of Ishiguma Daikenshi and Dairaseki Odome. They were positive that Iwa was aware that they had been taken into the Uzumaki clan by now, and that this was the Tsuchikage's way of preserving their good name. There were some unsettling changes in the other book. Every member of Team Kurenai was now present. The price on Shino's head was the lowest, at only 10,000 ryo, whereas Kurenai, who had been in the books for a while, was at 30,000. Additionally, Itachi, Kisame, and Itachi's status in this book had been 100,000, but they were no longer in the pages. Hinata's value was 30,000 alive and unharmed, and half that dead. Naruto had the dubious honor of having a 50,000 ryo bounty on him from the beginning. Apparently preferred alive, but dead kicked less. Looking up from the books, Naruto said, "So what, Hokage? Sama?" This was an official team meeting, and protocol was important, he inquired. "This actually limits where I can send you until the matter is resolved," Tsunade sighed. "I've dispatched an envoy to ask that the crimes you are accused of committing be included in this book and that the supporting documentation be examined. I can't send you too close to Kaminari no Kuni until we can convince him to take back the bounties. I was going to arrange for your team to conduct a border patrol in that direction, so that presents a challenge. This means that I have to send Team 7 to patrol the border while I send you to look into the Kumo ninja sighting in the Tanzaku-gai area. Your main task is reconnaissance, but if you're challenged, then I want prisoners," the Hokage said, pausing as she evaluated her shinobi. Ibiki finds it far more challenging to gather information from dead people. Orochimaru had been struggling to get good intelligence out of Konoha since Kabuto was captured, or betrayed. He wavered between the two depending on the day, and the few agents he had available were either too obvious and would be caught within hours, or they were ineffective and only managed to get him rumors and gossip. He was sorting through a pile of these reports, trying to separate the few valuable bits of fact from the dross of rumors, innuendo, and hearsay, when he came across a report that Kumo ninja were spotted close to Tanzaku Gai. I examined the assassination team his father had sent him. Their equipment was bloody and appeared to have been rarely cleaned because it was covered in dirt that must have been weeks old. He was sure that all of them were killers, but he wondered what exactly they had been killing the likely unarmed civilians because they appeared to have been selected as disposable assets and were never meant to survive the mission. The tall, dark-skinned man stood, flexing his arms as he did, highlighting the massive bracers he wore there. A quick glance at the Hite.8 each killer wore told him they were cheap knock-offs of real Kumo emblems, and bad ones at that. He looked up at B and Yugito, who were watching from the trees behind the wood.be assassins, which the idiots hadn't even looked at twice. Both shook their heads, not recognizing any of the 6 people now in front of I whispered, "I'm starting to wonder if there's any way to save it." Ichiro gave a small nod and extended a scroll. "I'm concerned. I am aware that Nijiro and I have been a little arrogant about our own significance, but I wrote down the jutsu that connects twins like me and Nijiro. It's not a Kekkei Genkai, but it only works for twins. If I don't make it with Nijiro, I hope that this and 2 Jinchuriki will be sufficient to persuade Konoha to take you in." I took the scroll and slipped it into his flak vest before turning to address the assassination squad leader and asking, "So, how do we enter Konoha? B and I are too obviously from Kumo, and the group of you stand out too much to just enter the gates. Overall, I must say that your stealth and infiltration are lacking." "With those bounties, the Bleeding Hearts won't send them to our border," the lead assassin said, tossing the larger man the most recent Kumo bingo book. "We've let people know that we're in the vicinity. Until we get their team, we simply eliminate any Konoha ninjas they send. Easy." Shocked, I looked up at him and waved the bingo book. What possible crimes could justify this? They haven't done anything to be put in here. "Well, you see, we have some orders for you." Through Hai no Kuni's dense forests, Team Kurenai had been moving quickly. The team was moving quickly, but not so quickly that they couldn't talk about the mission, with Naruto on point and Shino in the rear. Kurenai remarked, "Kumo shinobi are supposed to be better than this. Their training is about as good as Konoha's." "Well, probably better since the civilian council was interfering. That's being fixed now, thank the kami." Hinata agreed, her Byakugan active as she looked around for danger. It's almost as if they wanted us to know where they were. When he smelled the scents on the wind ahead, Naruto had come to a complete stop. The rest of the team stopped when he raised his fist. Hinata was alerted by 2 fingers, who then tapped his temple to instruct her to use her Byakugan and pointed sharply to tell her where to concentrate. She did indeed see them. 10 Kumo ninja in all. However, 6 of those were dressed in cheap, blatantly fake Hite.8. It took a few seconds to relay the information, but Kurenai was aware of what commands to give in this circumstance. The Konoha team moved in quietly and listened. As I stared in shock at the scroll's commands, Yugito and B joined their teammates. He placed the scroll next to the twin link jutsu scroll in his vest and said, "So we've been ordered, as a diplomatic mission, to help Konoha smooth out the problems in the bingo book. Good. Perhaps his father wasn't as insane as this whole situation was making him believe." The lead assassin pulled out his sword and remarked, "The unprovoked murder of peaceful envoys is a big enough crime for those rewards, wouldn't you say? For such a dirty little man." The blade appeared suspiciously well maintained. Ichiro gasped and fell, his eyes widening. He managed to croak out, "Nijiro." He shivered and exhaled, poisoned. He didn't take a breath. Then again, perhaps not. Naruto could tell that the first group of Kumo nin would be killed by the second group. "They'll try," his travel companion remarked. 2 of them are Jinchuriki, although I doubt they've shared their names with them yet. As Kurenai had their full attention, he turned to his team captain for instructions, and she drew them out using the Konoha hand signals. In other words, they would defend the diplomats against their killers. Naruto was able to witness the first Kumo nin drop without explanation, and that one simultaneously drew his sword. From the trees, Team 8 leapt. B scowled after hearing Ichiro's final words and seeing him fall. They had undoubtedly been set up. Places in that bingo book would be guaranteed by this type of crime, but the timing would be peculiar. It was almost as if Pop wasn't himself. He was always more adept at the little things than that. And murdering his own sons for the charade alone. Alright, that was just Pop. He took the lead and didn't ask others to give up anything that he wouldn't, but he would give up anything. And anyone, it seemed. As he assumed his position, his swords started to dance their arcs simultaneously, all 7 blades in the most bizarre combat technique anyone had ever seen, combining juggling and swordsmanship in equal measure. However, the burning paralysis that was engulfing him and the handful of senbon that struck were not encouraging. Yugito had avoided the first set of needles, but just as she was about to take off her gloves, a poisoned kunai grazed her thigh, leaving behind the same paralytic poison that had struck B, along with a deep, bloody scratch. The senbon and kunai that were thrown at him were deflected by Ai's Inazuma no Yoroi, but it seems the assassins were also prepared for that. They were incredibly well prepared, and the smoke bomb they threw at him contained paralyzing incense of some sort. Ai was already down when it dispersed, and the lead assassin with the sword was approaching and thrusting with his blade. The assassin leapt back, cutting his sword and cheap hide in half, when a black dot and orange shape appeared, one arm swiping out wide. Ai strained his eyes to see a lovely woman in a Konoha uniform, a boy in a long greatcoat, and a girl in an orange jacket protecting the rest of his team. The vest's numerous additional pockets must be really useful. Within a minute, he could see them moving, and when the Jonin was presumably giving him an anti-paralytic. No, young man. The Kumo Jonin, who was protecting him, pulled him in the direction of his team and growled a warning to watch his own back first, which made the Konoha Chunin laugh. He pointed and turned Ai to face the same ninja who was carrying him, asking, "That back? I'm just the Kage Bunshin, Kumo-san, that's the boss." Naruto's entire focus was on the assassins in front of him after his clone successfully rescued the Jonin. He sliced at an approaching smoke bomb as its contents poured over him, proving that they were much better than they initially appeared to be. A spray of blood interrupted the assassin's cry of victory as he charged with his sword drawn, causing him to stumble backward and lose his sword arm. A second ninja then turned to use a medical jutsu. Kurenai gave Hinata the all-clear in the brief time it took, and she hurried to assist her husband. Shino watched over the Kumo diplomats. While they recuperated, Kurenai started the hand signals of a genjutsu she had recently learned from a genjutsu genin prodigy, and the newlyweds stood back to back and waited. Hinata pushed Naruto as she completed the final seal, and they both closed their eyes as the genjutsu swept through the room. Senten Yumi. The Kumo Jinchuriki and their captain were free to recuperate, and after what had just transpired, they were more than happy to express their worries about the Raikage's sanity, since the assassins were largely contained, with the exception of their medic, who, being somewhat intelligent, did not want to keep fighting, and the one-armed man. This half-baked scheme was well documented, and after they returned some prisoners to Ibiki, Kurenai turned to Hinata and spoke rapidly. "We need your fastest squirrel. This information has to get back to the Hokage at once," she stated. "Shino, if your allies are willing, we'll need some guards." Almost immediately, the Kumo assassins were encircled by a circle of glimmering Kakaichu. As one of his clones boiled water, the Konoha Jinchuriki was digging in his pack and asking, "Naruto, what are you doing?" Hinata answered, "He's making coffee, on his behalf." Kurenai raised an eyebrow in curiosity, and Hinata continued, "These are special circumstances, and there is something you have to remember about my squirrels. Barring dire circumstances, you should never, ever, caffeinate a squirrel." After Team Kurenai had traveled 3 days in the opposite direction, the coffee-jazzed squirrel arrived in Konoha in less than an hour. Shortly afterward, the squirrel had returned from its origin, and the scroll was in the Hokage's hands. As she read the report, Tsunade was laughing, and Hiruzen was so intrigued that she summoned a message scroll. He questioned, what trouble did they get into now? Team Kurenai have managed to find the supposed crimes that they're in the Kumo bingo book for. Apparently, and let's see if you can follow this closely, they killed some Kumo diplomats. These diplomats received their orders to help straighten out the misunderstandings in the bingo book mere moments before the messengers turned out to be their assassins, and Team Kurenai showed up just in time to save them. So, Hiruzen became aware of the line of reasoning. So they saved the people they're in the bingo book for killing, after they were put in the book for killing them? Kumogakure is going to be such a laughingstock after this. A response team was promptly put together and dispatched at Tsunade's direction to apprehend the assassins and deliver fresh directives for Team Kurenai. The performance that these so-called assassins had given left Orochimaru feeling let down. He didn't want to give away too soon, and if what he had heard was even partially true, the boy had gotten rid of Kisame, and the girl had destroyed Itachi. Although their leader's unreasonable focus on Jinchuriki was so intense that they would have been looking in that direction anyhow, the rest of the Akatsuki would be investigating that issue. However, if the lost Sannin was right, There were 3 Jinchuriki down there right now. Odds that even he didn't think he could overcome. No, another day and another location would come. And maybe he could still catch a glimpse of Uchiha's eyes. All he needed was a good plan. Beyond the obvious, of course, he wondered hazily as he slipped away, his mind formulating and discarding schemes, why the Akatsuki were so fixated on the Biju. But why did they want to gather them all if all they wanted was power? 8 shadowy figures gathered before a genuinely unsightly statue in a secret room. Instead of annoying the others with a strange voice and half-mad antics, one of them, a man wearing a spiral mask with a single eyepiece, was unusually silent. He had been deeply affected by the news about Itachi. After all, the Sharingan had some weaknesses, such as the Byakugan's blind spot, which an adversary could exploit. However, he had no idea what it was. The bad news didn't end there, either. As a former Suna ninja, Akasuna no Sasori said, the Sanbi is no longer contained. Yagura was killed in the Kiri uprising, and even now they are replacing him. They received assistance from some new hidden village calling itself Shiogakure no Sato, and the Sanbi's essence was dispersed. It could be anywhere from 2 to 20 years before that blasted turtle reappears. I recommend that we move on to the next target. The leader, easily identified by his purple eyes with 6 concentric circles in each and his black metal piercings all over him, spoke. That will not work. We have come across information that has caused us to re-evaluate our current methods. All the Biju must be manifest and contained at the time or this will not work. In addition, the Biju must be returned in the same order from how they were separated from the original, from least powerful to most. So we will gather our information and recruit back to full strength. Can we recover the missing rings? A Venus flytrap appeared to be worn by one of the shadowy figures to conceal his face. I doubt it, he said quietly, but the attempt will be made. Do we know of any who will be strong enough to replace the renegade Uchiha and one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist? We do not, stated the lone female. I will be keeping an eye on those who might fill such a role, and will do the recruiting personally. The leader spoke once more, this time to 2 of the others who had not yet done so. I don't care how much is offered in any bingo book, the 2 of you are not to pursue Uzumaki or his team until I give the go. Ahead. Once we have his Biju, then we can worry about the bounties, not before. The figure with the spiral mask raised its voice. Perhaps if we wait long enough, Konoha will gather the Biju for us. One-stop shopping, fun for the whole family. It was a little more challenging to return to Konoha with 6 assassins as prisoners. It did not seem to Naruto that he could put living things in storage scrolls and have them emerge alive at the other end. They could move more quickly after the retrieval team caught up to them. When it was revealed that the only reason the Uzumakis and their team had survived was because of the people who were allegedly responsible for their deaths, the arrival of the Kumo diplomats for whom the messages claimed that they were in the bingo book had a significant impact. And that, following the publication of the bingo book, they had received orders that were marked as having been issued prior to the murder. It was a huge, convoluted diplomatic mess and a huge embarrassment for both Kumo and the holdouts, who had demanded Naruto's handover because they believed he was the demon inside of them despite the evidence to the contrary. Remarkably few of them had been tampered with, in the same way as the shinobi and civilians on the council. Tsunade dismissed the pig-headed idiots as being ignorant and stupid, until, of course, they broke a law. On that day, Konohamaru returned to the academy for the first time in a week. He was eager to return as soon as the Hokage declared him fully recovered, and who could know better? He discovered Moegi and Udon, a somewhat irritated couple of friends who had been quite concerned about him ever since the incident. They weren't sure if he was truly okay and were aware that adults often gave things the best possible spin for kids. He greeted them and dismissed their concerns as unimportant before turning to survey the classroom. Since the majority of the class insisted on judging her by her family name, Hannaby was sitting by herself, as she had grown accustomed to doing. She had made multiple trips to the hospital to see Konohamaru, but only when she could see he was ready to sleep. She didn't know why he had this strange effect on her, but whenever he was around, she felt like hiding. She pressed her forehead to her desk's cool wood. Now I'm acting like Oni Chan used to around Naruto.ni, she said. But I don't want to take that long to figure things out. What do I do? She heard, hey, Hannah. Chan, and froze. She could be called that by precisely 2 people. She glanced up and noticed Konohamaru and his 2 companions. This is Moegi, and Udon. You ran off before I could say you're welcome, you know. By the way, call me Kono.kun, like my grandpa and Naruto.ni.san do. Naruto nearly couldn't believe what he had been told. We have to do what? He asked. Though a little more reserved, Hinata and Shino were equally taken aback by their upcoming mission. Tsunade sighed, getting ready to say it again. Since I've had to send a Jonin team on this mission, and it seemed tailor-made for them, I sent Yuhi Kurenai and Mitarashi Anko with Sarutobi Hiruzen to deliver our discoveries to Tetsu no Kuni for impartial evaluation. As a result, I have your team sitting around with nothing to do but train, and since the Academy's standards for our ninjas seem to be so lax, I felt that having a team of Chunin teaching for the next few weeks would be a good thing. You just happen to be the first on the roster. Shino questioned, "Why is this so important to you, Hokage?" Sama. Usually a Chunin who is assigned to teaching duties has some injury or other complication to prevent them from assuming regular duties, or they have chosen that path. While I do not deny that teaching is important, it is difficult to see the cadets as willing to learn from those barely older than themselves. Tsunade gave a headshake. In her own words, "You've caught me there." This mission was also requested by the teacher assigned to a particular class. The entering class this year, who believes that his students would benefit from meeting the heroes of the invasion up close. It sounded like Iruka Sensei's way of thinking, and Naruto nodded. But Tsunade was far from done. "I don't know if you're aware of it, but one of the requirements before a Chunin can be promoted is a period of duty at the academy. Since Jonin Sensei must be able to teach effectively, they must learn how, so some time at the academy is needed to assess that. Each of you will need to figure out what field from the curriculum you will specialize in, and prepare a lesson and grading plan. Shizune will give you some scrolls on the curriculum and possible teaching methods and styles." Dismissed. Team Kurenai had been talking about the differences between what they had been taught and the curriculum that was listed when they arrived at Ichiraku's. Naruto knew Hinata would be a great teacher of chakra theory and control, so she had seized the opportunity. To his surprise, Shino chose to focus on the practical aspects of learning, declaring taijutsu and weapons to be his new area of expertise. Naruto continued to eat his beef ramen while scowling at the list of subjects. He had an idea, but he hadn't done anything similar in a long time. Nearly 4 years. No, in just a few weeks it will be 4 years. It wasn't shocking that Team 10 showed up while they were eating because Otome and Choji both ate a lot and had persuaded Ino that exercising more would help keep the extra food off her hips. They had been escorting a small caravan on their previous mission with Shinshi Sensei, and the bandits they had encountered were numerous, if not very skilled. According to their story, Ino had frequently expressed gratitude for Shinshi's rigorous training. Ino was shocked to hear about Team Kurenai's upcoming task. "No way. You haven't even been out of the academy for a year, and the Hokage already wants you to teach?" Choji remarked, "It makes sense, kind of, in between bowls. They made a big name for themselves at the Chunin exams, and the kids at the academy will have heard a lot about them, maybe enough that they'll pay attention." Otome gave a slight scowl. She was certain that they were missing something. She asked, hoping to jog her memory, "Which class is it?" "Entering year," declared Naruto. "We're apparently young enough to be a novelty, and old enough that they might listen." "You mean, the class with Sarutobi Konohamaru and Hyuga Hannaby, among others?" Naruto froze in surprise. Then he realized, "You're right. What am I going to do? Gigi. Sama's going to kill me." He gave Hinata the sheet with the course he intended to teach after she asked, "Why?" Situational awareness, stealth, and traps. Team 7 was worn out when they reached Konoha's gates. On the High no Kuni side of the border, ambushes and traps had been set up for the border patrol, so things had not gone as planned. The majority of these were by Kumo nin, but they weren't particularly powerful, rather, they seemed to be a test for the Kumo genin. By dropping the genin teams into a box on a wagon traveling that direction, Kakashi was able to fulfill his orders to return the prisoners they had taken to Kaminari no Kuni. As far as his genin were concerned, their relief had not come quickly enough, and they had had to exert themselves more than ever before. They were examined by the masked Jonin. Although the curse mark had made Sasuke frugal with his use of chakra and particularly his Sharingan, the team was in reasonably good shape despite the demands of their mission. The black chakra had a tendency to seep into his own if he used either for an extended period of time. Nobody knew what this stuff was or where it originated, but the consequences were. It was unpleasant enough that it was wise to avoid using it. With a gash on his outer right thigh that they had just about prevented from getting infected while it healed, he was the team's most seriously injured member. Now if only I had Naruto's Kekkei Genkai, Sasuke thought, then I'd have been healed within seconds, and this whole patrol would have been a walk in the park. Naruto and the rest of Team Kurenai's inclusion in the Kumo bingo book they had taken had been shocking, and Team 7's incredulity that they belonged there but still lingered. Akamaru, who had suffered a kunai to the hind leg in their most recent battle, was being nursed by Kiba. For a larger hound, the wound wouldn't have been severe, but as it was, Akamaru couldn't walk. Over his shoulder, he called, "Guys, I have to get home and get Hana to help Akamaru. You take care before taking off." Kakashi gave nod. "I'll take care of the report to the Hokage," he replied. "The two of you should visit the hospital, get something to eat, maybe visit the hot springs to relax. Take care and take it easy." As they turned to face the hospital, Sakura silently offered Sasuke her shoulder as their Jonin. Sensei vanished in a whirl of leaves. The secret of Tsunade. Sama's extraordinary strength, but not her endurance, had somehow come to her naturally. She was simply, without asking or pressuring him to do anything, there. In some ways, it was simpler to accept when she pretended not to make the offer. They noticed the members of Team Kurenai as they were walking past the academy. At any rate, Shino and Hinata, Uruka, Sensei was observing his students as Shino leaned against a tree. Hinata was showing off the leaf. Floating method, but in a unique way. She twirled a leaf over each finger on her hand and said, "To truly achieve better control, practice until you can manage this, and then." She paused, focusing for a moment, and the leaves started to twirl in opposite directions to their neighbors. Sakura didn't believe she could pull it off. This can take a while to master, but if you can manage this, many other techniques will come to you far more easily. Naruto emerged from the shadows behind Hinata as Sasuke grunted, kissing her cheek quickly enough to make the kids laugh. "All right," he said, "I'm Uzumaki Naruto, and I'll be teaching you the last third of our lesson. Now, all of you have different levels of and control of your chakra, and Shino already covered the regular combat arts, so I'm going to teach you the equalizer, the art of fighting without being there, and how to maintain situational awareness. Each of you has a number on a note taped to your back that I put there a few minutes ago. These numbers will tell you your teams for this exercise." He took out a scroll and opened a number of compartments. "The teachers here will recall the days when I was a terrible prankster, pulling pranks on Anbu, villagers and shinobi alike. It would make people angry when I caught them like that, and then I would get chased all over the village. After my abduction, I became a bit more serious, and it came to me that had I chosen, the harmless pranks could have been so much worse. Substitute exploding tags for the paint I used, and we wouldn't have such a wonderful monument of the Hokages to admire." Every kid was staring at the mountain. With a foxy smile that exuded a sense of immense mischief, Naruto grinned. "The key to all pranks is that they are simply non-lethal traps, intended to amuse everyone, except the poor person caught in them. You need to plan. Remember this. Prior planning prevents poor performance." Sasuke snorted as the blonde youth's words were echoed by the class, but not with the disdain that it once might have. He talked as he and Sakura made their way to the hospital. "I wonder if the Hokage realizes exactly what she's let Konoha in for." Ino discovered that the most common rumors in the village had something to do with the name Uzumaki. When older people were talking about the name, there was frequently astonishment in their voices or someone adamantly stating certain facts. If they were younger, it was awe-inspiring, sometimes bordering on hero worship, particularly if the children were of the academy's age. As far as they were concerned, Shino appeared to have been given the title of honorary Uzumaki, and the lessons their team imparted were absorbed. The surprise of their marriage was a common topic of conversation among those their own age. Prior to defecting, the Kumo team that participated in the Chunin exams was the new Team 8, along with their sensei, Tsuru Shikanshi. There were now other Kumo nin present, but there was much debate about whether or not they would remain Kumo, and once more, the Uzumaki name was in the center. Even though all the blonde Kunoichi wanted to do was scoff, she had started looking up the name because she hated to be the last to share the news. Ino believed she could safely ignore the 2 entries in the records prior to Naruto, even though there were now 3 more, for a total of 6. The Shodem's wife, Uzumaki Mito, who adopted the Senju name, passed away more than 30 years ago. At more than a century old. Although her exact age was unknown, she had lived in Konoha for at least that long. She was unlikely to be directly related to Naruto, though. Kushina, the other Uzumaki, was originally from Uzushiobikure no Sato. Similar to Mito. For an undisclosed cause, and stayed here until her death on October 10th, which was now nearly 14 years ago. In fact, only 2 weeks away from it. She hesitated, and turned the registry's pages to Naruto's name. Born the 10th of October. Nearly 14 years ago, she turned back to Kushina's entry and looked up the cause of death, problems during childbirth. However, didn't the Kyuubi attack occur on October 10th of that year? How were these two related to that? She put these queries aside and started reading and making notes, finding out as much as she could about the woman who was probably Naruto's mother. Tsunade turned to Naruto after taking a look at the complaints that had accumulated on her desk. She pointed. "Do you see that?" she asked. He gave a nod. "So explain to me why I'm getting all these complaints from citizens of Konoha. Please. They all seem to be the sorts of things you used to get up to, and that's why I wanted to speak to you." Naruto grinned. He put a copy of his lesson plan on the desk and said, "I freely admit that I have had a hand in their conception and execution, even though I did not perform any of the actions that led to these reports and complaints." It initially appeared to be a list of tricks and mischievous activities, but he later gave a list of alternatives to the ingredients that almost caused Tsunade to turn white. "I'm teaching them stealth, situational awareness and traps," he continued, "and any of the pranks that they have performed could easily have been a lethal trap set in its place. Contact poisons in place of itching powder, explosive tags instead of paint, razor wire instead of trip cords. And my students have been tested on harder targets each week. Sort of grading assignments. If they do get busted, they have to run, which also helps their fitness and evasion skills. I make sure they're not caught outright, and I grade their work on the Monday. If you have this many complaints, ask how their security was so poor that Academy First years could find ways around it." Tsunade turned to the young man she had spent the previous 5 years or so viewing as a sort of grandson. "When do you test them on the Hokage's residence?" Naruto gave a shrug. "Someone has to prank Anko successfully first." The class was set up by Naruto so that each team of 4 people worked under a randomly selected leader. This was Konohamaru, who ended up carrying the number 8 in the group. Because of the draw, his closest friends Udon, Moegi, and Hannaby made up his cadet team. They meshed really well together. Moegi was a genius with improvised materials. Hannaby was an excellent scout. Udon was a good strategist and long-term planner, and Konohamaru had an innate understanding of improvised tactics when things went wrong. Moegi had also memorized multiple variations of each prank that used the materials they brought with them. For example, right now, they had planned and sneaked into their target's apartment, and Hannaby had watched while Moegi gave the boys instructions on how to pull the prank. Udon and Moegi escaped unscathed, but Hannaby was caught in the open and in a panic after his hissed warning warned them of the target's return. When the door opened, Konohamaru had plenty of time to get away, but it seemed that the small part of him that had put him between this girl and that missing Nin was in control because he hurried to her side and kissed her as he had witnessed Naruto.ni.san kiss his wife. Mitarashi Anko stopped when she noticed 2 children sharing a kiss in the center of her living room. Pulling back, she said, "Sorry, must have the wrong door," and closed it behind her. After verifying the number, she discovered that it was her apartment. However, the 2 brats had left by the time the door was open. Muttering, she grabbed some dango from her refrigerator. Dango that had been served with wasabi. Naruto turned to Tsunade at the scream that reverberated throughout the village. He said, "That'll be next weekend, then, Tsunade Sama," as the Hokage lowered her face into her palm and pushed back her hat. Kono.kun, said Hannaby softly. "Why'd you kiss me?" The boy said, "I'm sorry I had to kiss you there, Hana-chan. It should have been someplace special, and I should have asked, but it was an emergency and you froze up and I had to do something. I hope this doesn't make you mad." Hannaby considered. She was aware that Oni-chan had kissed Naruto.ni in that manner. Wasn't too bad. It was kind of nice. The next one had better be in the right place and time, then. As they rushed to meet the other 2, Konohamaru's thoughts went blank. He thought, "Next one?" And a silly smile appeared on his face. Haishi remarked, "Hannaby has been telling me about the lessons you were giving at the academy," while his oldest daughter meticulously and methodically made the tea. Although Naruto liked coffee, she discovered that the ceremony had a calming quality. It was still very much more her style than his, even though he had learned how for her. She offered the tea to her father now. She said, "What exactly is it that concerns you about this, father?" as he took a slow sip of the brew following the necessary period of reflection. "Have I done anything wrong?" "No," he said. "Far from it, you have instituted a grand change, one I had failed to convince the Hyuga elders to permit. Your mother believed that the cadets would benefit from instruction in our chakra control exercises, but the elders forbade her from teaching them. Something they seem to have forgotten to do with you. And now it is far too late for them to forbid you anything, as they have no authority over the Uzumaki. It is well, daughter, it is well." For a while, they sat there drinking tea while Hinata reveled in her father's admiration for her and waited for Naruto to come back. Ino developed her plan in silence, being cautious and patient. After finding the information about Naruto's mother, she was able to recruit her first accomplice in a matter of days. At the suggestion of that accomplice, she extended her list to include the Hokage, several academy students, and other people from the village. She was now waiting for the final 3 potential accomplices to join this small plot. She went up to the 3 targets as they entered the village and made a quick, straightforward request, which they granted. Knowing that preparations were being made, Ino grinned as she left. Soon, Uzumaki Naruto, she thought, soon you will get exactly what you deserve. On what would normally be the worst day of his life, Naruto woke up to find himself securely strapped into a chair in a pitch-black room. He could hear and, with some effort, smell the others, so he wasn't alone. There were no smells that he connected to stress, pain, or other things that one might expect from captivity, and no one was afraid or frightened. Ino was standing in front of a single lit candle. She said, Uzumaki Naruto, with solemnity. There has been a great injustice arrayed against you. Those of us here gathered stand here to make this right. I am the one responsible, and so I am the one to lead you through this night, a right that each and every one of us, save only you, has been subject to. A second candle was lit, revealing Hinata, and Ino Shino emerged, lighted by his lightning Kakaichu, and Kuranai lit her candle. Despite the darkness of your life, you have found a companion, someone to show you how to walk in the light of love, and you had the good sense not to let her go when you stumbled into her heart. They all lit their candles when Ino gestured to them. When others saw you as you should have been seen all along, and accepted you for who you are, you did not push them away. You valued them, and grew stronger for them, and for their own sakes you helped them grow as well. Everyone here has been touched by your life in one way or another, and we have all come together for this most solemn rite. Now that things appeared to be becoming serious, Naruto was beginning to worry. What kind of injustice did these people set out to correct that would be so severe that it affected everyone he touched? He prepared himself for the worst as everyone in the room held their breath. As they started singing, "Happy Birthday to You." He guessed it could have been worse after Hinata had released him and given him a sound hug and kiss. Naruto's first actual birthday party could be deemed a success because Ino had organized it and Hinata had to have assisted the pranksters or he would have suddenly woken up at the strange smells. Even if the customary celebration was taking place outdoors, the gifts were more practical in nature. Tenten even gave him a voucher for a free weapon fitting at her father's store, which covered both him and Hinata, in addition to jutsu scrolls and dining vouchers. But Ino's gift, a partnership with the Hokage and several Jonina, was unique. A big book, a collection of images and tales, regarding a certain Uzumaki Kushina. However, the book was only partially filled. When Ino said, "I'm sorry, Naruto, I tried, but I couldn't find anything about your dad, not even his name." Her apology was waved away by Naruto. "I'm sure several people know who he is, Ino," he replied. He held his Hinata. I'm close to him and said, "I know his name, and why he's stayed a secret, and exactly what it means. Maybe someday I can tell everyone, but for now he has to stay a secret." He had revealed the secret to her, and she had reluctantly accepted his justification. Still, he thought it was a good night. He was being stared at by Anko. He raised an eyebrow in response to her question. "How do you do it?" "I bribed your star pupils, the ones who pranked me, to put laxatives in your drink, and they should be kicking in now." "So how?" She drank from her cup. "Oh, that," he remarked casually. "I switched cups with you." Naruto examined the grades he had given each student in his class. Shino had discovered a style in Konoha that worked for each of the different students, and while that was the standard academy style for the majority, it wasn't for everyone. For instance, udon was more appropriate for improvised weaponry, in which anything could be used as a lethal weapon, such as paperclips, chairs, garden tools, or ladders. He gave him some challenging tasks, such as finding 10 weapons he could use to attack an adversary in any room he entered. The boy was combining academy style taijutsu with a strong 8 out of 10. Additionally, he directed Hannaby to her sister because the Hyuga girl was more suited to Hinata's evolving gentle storm than the primary gentle fist style. Students were well on their way to becoming proficient in the leaf floating exercise, demonstrating the clear impact of Hinata's lessons. While Hannaby had 4 leaves and was currently working on their direction, Konohamaru had only managed to manage it with 1, and several had advanced to 2. That Naruto's class had emerged as the most popular among the students may not have come as a surprise. An entire course in which you were graded on your performance in addition to learning how to pull practical jokes. I mean, what child wouldn't adore it? It was a surefire way to succeed right away, especially when you include a teacher who gave him extra credit for playing a practical joke. When his final class ended, he was ready to head out, but Konohamaru stopped him. The class rose in unison as he called, "Naruto. Sensei, wait," and the blonde shinobi turned. With a collective, "Naruto. Sensei," they bowed deeply. "Thank you very much." "It has been my honor," he said, his voice catching on the final syllable. As he walked out of the room, Hinata was the only one who noticed the single tear of joy streaming down his cheek. As Tsunade reflected on the previous weeks that Naruto had been teaching at the academy, she glanced at the mission requests in front of her. Naturally, the kids had adored it, but the parents? Not at all. She concluded that it had been a success overall. She now needed to determine their next mission. It was difficult to sort through the daimyo's orders and everyone else's requests. This was mixed with reports from years ago, and Hiruzen had told her his calculated secret to handling paperwork. However, because of her persistent henge and the focus point on her forehead, she didn't have enough reserves for more than a few clones. She found exactly what she was looking for when she opened the next scroll. Almost immediately, Naruto and Hinata were awake, and they were up before the melody of the door. Chimes died down. Hinata was already making her husband a quick breakfast of rice balls and tea or coffee when Naruto, hastily putting on his working clothes, opened the door. As Naruto's shadow clones finished their brief cleaning run, a spot was prepared for Kurenai at the table as well, and the clones were leaving, their tasks finished. Their sensei described her arrival while they were eating. "The Hokage wants Team Kurenai for a specific recovery mission," she stated. She recently received a request from an old friend in Cha no Kuni, and sent Team 7 on the B-rank bodyguard mission. However, Master Jiraiya's spies have reported the movement, from AIM, of a renegade Konoha shinobi, a traitor by the name of Rokusho Aoi. He was of similar mind to Mizuki, and we believed he tricked the genin who was actually accused of the crime into running with him, although it was reported by the ninja sent to deal with them that the boy was dead. She stopped and looked at the couple in front her. "We have since discovered that the boy is still alive. In fact, he is most likely the runner that we just sent Team 7 to guard. Morino Idate." After both Chunin gasped, Hinata was the first to speak again. The two exchanged glances as Kurenai nodded. "I.is any relation T.to Ibiki? Sama?" Ibiki was also the ninja sent after them that day. "I believe it was 5 years ago, plus some months," said Kurenai. "I doubt he'd have let even his little brother go if he wasn't convinced of his innocence in the theft, but he never did think Idate was suited to be a ninja." She exhaled. "But that's not important now. Your mission is to deal with Aoi, and recover the artifact with which he bought his way into becoming an AIM Jonin, the sword of the Nidaime Hokage, the Raijin." After saying, "Wait a second," Naruto hurried to his feet and placed his hands on the table. "What do you mean, your mission? Aren't you coming with us?" Kurenai gave a headshake. "Tsunade. Sama wants you to do this without me. Apparently the results from your last mission were impressive. Now she wants to see if the quality stays the same on other missions. Instead of leading you, I'll be covering the basics and practice of Genjutsu at the academy for 3 weeks. Oh, and Naruto, Anko would still like a, how did she put it? A frank and pointed discussion with you about one group of cadets and 2 switched drinks, whatever she means by that." His smile was big and anxious. Wow, look at that, we have a mission to do. What awful timing," he said quickly. As the 3 shinobi, who were part of Team Uzumaki for this mission and were led by Hinata, sped toward the border with Kawa no Kuni, the forest flashed by. This Aoi would have to travel through the river dotted country and rent a boat at the port in order to get from Amegakure no Sato to Cha no Kuni, unless he was a total idiot who would avoid Hai no Kuni like the plague. It would be much easier for Team 7 if they could intercept him, but if not, they were confident they could find him. As they ran and jumped, their speed consuming the miles, there was a hush. Reassuring, particularly to Naruto, who didn't hear a displeased Anko pursuing them. "I see him," Hinata remarked as she gazed out at the ship that was fading into the distance. Neither her summons nor Shino's, which could fly, could carry anyone that far. "He's out of reach, unless we could suddenly fly." They had no Hai no Kuni contacts here, civilian transportation was risky at best, and running on the water would leave them out in the open for far too long. Their target would actually escape if they halted here, and they would probably get to Cha no Kuni ahead of Team 7 and their civilian guide. It was annoying. Naruto abruptly said, "Hinata," after surveying the waterfront. She turned to face her husband, who gestured toward a ship bearing Nami no Kuni's blue wave emblem. "Do you think they might be willing to give us a lift?" The captain turned out to be very helpful. They gained some respect from the sailors because they were among those who brought down Gatu, and soon after, they were chasing the slower passenger ship. Although the Nami ship managed to maintain sight of the ferry, it was clear from the beginning that the other ship would still reach port before they could catch it. Since they could not always be sure of a calm surface to the water they had to cross, the open sea was too new a challenge for their water walking skills, something they all noted to practice when they returned. The Konoha shinobi could not wait any longer as the passenger ferry started to dock. Naruto called back over his shoulder, "Thanks, Captain, we'll just have to walk from here." The three ninja then leapt over the rail, forcing chakra through their feet to start their run to shore at Hinata's nod. Glaring back at the Nami vessel, Rokusho Aoi saw three figures jump from the side and start running toward the shore. "Ninja." He turned and pointed to his team. He looked back over his shoulder as he left the boat and said, "Those ninja, I need you to scout and tell me where they're from, and what they're after. Then we can meet up with the client. Oh, and if they spot you, kill them." It's possible that ninjas were employed by others besides the Wagarashi to influence the race. However, they were portrayed as more honorable than that in all of the Wasabi stories. All men bleed the same color, so whatever. Mubi glanced at Oboro and Kagari, who both indicated that they were ready. They remained motionless, alert, and prepared to move when the traps sounded. The AIM ninja emerged on the branches as their targets stood there defenseless as the ninja. Wire entangled them irrevocably and the kunai laden with explosive tags thudded into the ground around them. The three ninja who were pursuing them entered the clearing and froze, right in the middle of the traps. According to their Hite.8, they were from Konoha. The boy and girl in the orange and black jackets wore theirs around their necks, the one with the long coat and dark glasses wore his on his brow, and all three were wearing the dark green utility vests that were characteristic of Konoha Chunin. They were only genin, but they knew enough about Aoi's past to know that he wouldn't want any Konoha nin to come after him. They also vividly recalled that last month, when the AIM nin had been eliminated from the exams in the second round in a matter of minutes, these three had passed those damn Chunin exams. It must have been a ruse. Mubi yelled, "Hey, Oboro, they're your tags, what do you think?" Oboro waved to Kagari first, but he preferred the kunai with explosive tags. "More oil," said the man. "Then we can have a barbecue." As Mubi raised his crossbow, Oboro placed his hands in the right seal and channeled his chakra, triggering the explosive tags. Kagari braced and flicked his hands through the jutsu, spraying the three trapped ninja with oil from his mouth. Mubi removed the instructions Aoi had given him as the clearing was consumed by flames, a roar of fire briefly drawing the air inward. Now to see where Aoi wanted us to meet up. Three popping sounds from inside the flames briefly diverted his attention. He couldn't remember seeing anything that would do that in the clearing. Another hand pounded him in the stomach, a hurricane of chakra surged through him, and a feminine hand snatched the scroll containing his instructions from his grasp. Hinata's gentle voice was the final sound Mubi heard before consciousness left him. "Arigato, AIM.san, we needed that scroll." When the swarm of insects rose from beneath Kagari, they engulfed the unfortunate ninja and muffled any noise he might have made. The crackle of their lightning chakra discharge was lost in the noise of the fire in the clearing. Kagari couldn't see well through the leaping flames, but he thought someone had appeared on the branch next to Mubi. The popping noises startled Oboro, and the white smoke that replaced the three Konoha ninja in the clearing told him right away what they really were. Clone shadows. He felt three sharp points against his belly and sharp pain in both hands as he started to form the hand signs to the Kawarimi no Jutsu, expecting to be attacked at any moment. The male ninja in the orange jacket's hand had pierced both hands with three extremely sharp claws made of an odd alloy. The AIM ninja could only concur when Naruto said softly, "No hand seals, no jutsu. Please don't resist, you're in no shape for it." The scroll did not specify the route this Aoi intended to take to get there, but it did provide enough information about the location where the AIM shinobi were to meet the clients. It was the scent of the crossbow wielding shinobi that Naruto could just make out on the scroll. Their best chance of finding the cunning ninja appeared to be Hinata's Byakugan, but she needed to have him within range. After removing all weapons and equipment from their prisoners before using ninja wire to secure them to a tree, Hinata was a bit too giving. Or perhaps she was copying Anko, who left an emergency medical kit on a log across the clearing from the ninjas who were bound. Hinata asserted that Kagari had several senbon, Shino took Oboro's explosive tags, and Naruto obtained Mubi's crossbow and bolts. Team Uzumaki dashed through the trees, leaving the secured shinobi to wake up on their own. Oboro surveyed the open space. They had been kind enough to bandage his hands to prevent him from bleeding to death, but because of the bandages and his injuries, he was unable to successfully attempt escape or create hand seals. It appeared that he would simply have to wait for Kagari to recover because Mubi would probably take a long time to wake up, and the girl's eyes yelled Hyuga at him. Oh, well, he considered, it could be worse. It could be raining. There was a rumble of thunder in the distance. From the trees, Aoi heard the three ninjas running toward him. He ducked quickly and watched his genin land, but there was a problem. He thought they didn't move quite right. After years of teaching at the academy in Konoha, he noticed some differences between his team and the shinobi below him as they moved around, taking a break from trying to catch up to him. The person who appeared to be Mubi was always modifying the way his crossbow sat and fit. Mubi was an expert at that. Oboro's imposter didn't have the habit of extending his neck when he was sleeping, and Kagari's replacement moved differently like a woman. They had to have lost if they weren't his genin, and that these three would just have to pass away. Hinata's cries of poison as the three of them shed their henge transformations served as all the warning Naruto needed to cover his wife and his best friend with enough shadow clones to protect them from harm, even though doing so exposed him to the lethal steel rain. The hail of senbon needles that fell from the trees was not wholly unexpected. The senbon's burning effect upon impact verified that it was a potent poison, most likely designed to be fatal within minutes. He dropped to one knee, purposefully shaking his hands slightly as he started to draw out the thin steel weapons. The toxin was already being neutralized by his Sokai Katsuryoku bloodline. He was tempted to signal the plan to Hinata and Shino, who had hid behind trees, but Aoi would interpret such signals just as easily as their intended recipients. He collapsed, looking at Hinata with a bewildered expression he hoped she could see through. Hinata nearly ran after Naruto as he fell, but she restrained herself from leaving cover. She didn't know how fast or even how well Naruto's bloodline burned through poisons, but he was down. However, there was nothing that could be done about it now. She was being told where Aoi was by her active Byakugan. And that Naruto's breathing remained constant and steady. After all, he hadn't been that impacted. Her response had to be as genuine as possible since he was attempting to trick the former Konoha ninja. Shino, she exclaimed. Can you tell if Naruto's okay from there? He was hit, but I didn't see how many senbon he took. Shino saw the mistake. Hinata could have counted all the senbon with her Byakugan, and the insect wielder quickly realized what she was doing. He responded, I'm afraid not, and then let loose a lot of his Kakaichu to go around the area. It was an improvised code that depended on his teammates comprehending his references, but with Aoi right there, they had little choice. This kind of ambush really bugs me. We should have left the mission to those three Chunin from the exams. She had received the message, and hoped Naruto had as well. You're right, Hinata said, but you know Naruto, always in the middle of things. Aoi leapt from the tree he had taken refuge in. They were unaware that the idiot in the open had no chance against the toxin on his senbon. He extracted the Raijin from his belt, filled it with his chakra, and the golden lightning blade began to crackle. His words were, ah, 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 as he held the blade above the blonde. For instance, he lightly touched Naruto's back with the sword, causing the boy to convulse as the lightning from the blade poured into him. You two had better step out where I can see you. The poison on the senbon is relatively painless, but the blade of the Raijin is nowhere near as pleasant. And I can take my time if you don't step out where I can see you. And Hinata, unsure of what he was searching for, noticed something that Aoi hadn't. His ribs had developed tiny spikes at the front that maintained contact with the ground after Naruto pushed out the bone metal spikes on his back. Aoi knew Shino wouldn't be able to see any signs, and Naruto wasn't suffering nearly as much as she had assumed. So it was her turn. Aoi leveled the Raijin at the girl as she emerged from behind the tree, then noticed her eyes. She was a Hyuga. However, that implied that she was aware of the precise number of senbon that had struck her deceased friend. And the subsequent responses, which he now knew to be suspicious, felt like some sort of team-based code. He was whirling to his left when he noticed the Kakaichu and made a series of one-handed seals with his left hand. Gukakyu no Jutsu. The Aburame Chunin winced as the fireball ripped through Shino's swarm, sensing the permanent loss of so many of his allies. Aoi then whirled around and made a lunge with the Raijin, thrusting straight at the heart of the Hyuga girl. It never arrived. With a meaty snicked, the boy who had been lying in the open all this time sprang to his feet, lacing strange metal claws around the Raijin's blade and securing it in place. The brat wasn't having any of the lightning that was crashing into it. No, the young Chunin was ignoring the pain and the overpowering odor of burned flesh. As her husband yelled out, Hinata saw the spikes coming from his heels and the lightning energy crackling through the bone metal and grounding out in the ground below. Now, As the traitor to her village reluctantly relinquished his prize, Hinata slipped to Aoi's side, her eyes wide. The Raijin, without a blade, fell to the ground as his chakra stopped, and Naruto groaned as the spikes on his heels came loose from the ground. Hinata's attention shifted to Aoi and his every action. Even though it might not be as effective as the Raijin's, he was aiming for a different weapon. The young Kunoichi said, "Uzumaki art," and Aoi's eyes grew wide. He was familiar with that name. Gentle Storm, 8 winds, 60. 4 thunders. Even though Naruto's whisker marks had turned blue, no one else there could see how time seemed to slow for her. He could sense her speed as he forced himself to stand up far enough to see the ending. She struck, her chakra hammering with the elemental force of a thunderstorm while causing little physical damage, essentially destroying the renegade's chakra network, starting with his arms and quickly overwhelming him. The path to the 64 Prime Tenketsu was wide open to her vision as she struck. Hinata fell to her knees as the battered and helpless body of the former Konoha shinobi crumbled to the floor. She remarked, breathing heavily, "That was more draining than I thought," as her Naru-kun pulled himself up off the ground and approached her. He lowered himself to sit next to her, the faintly burned odor he exuded fading as his Kekkei Genkai repaired the damage. Shino took a seat as well, but on a nearby rock. "My primary colony took quite a hit, it's at 60%, and my secondary is at 80. If we can avoid needing to do this again." Naruto gave a nod. He still had somewhat blurry vision. It had hurt a lot to let that much power pass through him, even with a lightning affinity. "As soon as I'm not seeing double, I'll seal him in a prison scroll. It'll hold till we get back to Konoha." The captain from Nami was pleased to take them to a port in Hai no Kuni, and the return trip proceeded more slowly. It only took a few days to get back from there. Naruto embraced Hinata as they reached the top of the hill and saw the gates of Konoha in front of them. They were at home. The souvenir they brought Ibiki made him very happy, but Rokusho all. Not at all. Naruto the Kunoichi pardoned him for the tricks after he suggested that he tell Enko about breaking this traitor. Tsunade was happy to receive the Raijin and showed them why it was regarded as a Konoha treasure by taking them to a training ground. She inquired, "What size blade did Aoi make?" "I think it was about the size of a katana," Shino added. "That's because he didn't have a lightning affinity, nor did he have large reserves of chakra," Tsunade said. "According to my great uncle, Raijin's size was determined by those. My reserves are greater than his, even though I don't have a lightning affinity myself." The blade she was able to produce was a good foot longer than Aoi's. All 3 Chunin jumped at the chance to see how large they could make it, but since they all had the affinity, it was decided that Shino would go first. The Raijin in his hands was between the size of Aoi's and the Hokage's effort, but a significant portion of Shino's chakra flow did go to his Kakaichu. Hinata concentrated on the weapon, and her blade looked like the sword Zabuza used. Before Naruto truncated it. When Naruto lifted the hilt, he effortlessly managed a blade twice that size. Tsunade wished that Naruto would never have to pick up this blade and that he would never have to use the Kyuubi's chakra through it as she locked the Raijin away. They were told to bring him to me, as I couldn't stand his whims and desires. Find him in that pathetic village, break the seals that hold his curse mark, and bring him to me. I will have those eyes. With Kagaya Kimimaro once again in charge of the Auto Elite, time was of the essence. The 3 who had survived the Chunin exams and the disastrous invasion were joined by their predecessor, who had been regaining his strength for precisely this purpose. The rest of Orochimaru's elite then set out, with Uchiha Sasuke as their target, and there was no chance for them to fail. Sasuke sat in the tree thinking about the future. His brother was no longer a factor, caught and blind as he was, and rebuilding his clan was now his own decision. He continued to train hard and the missions he was chosen for were a decent challenge, but something was missing. He had no one to compare himself to, really. Kiba was a good friend and a decent second in command, but his progress was in a direction that Sasuke couldn't duplicate, lacking a partner like Akamaru. The last mission had been fairly easy, and the 3 AIM nin who had shown up were woefully unprepared, and Sakura had dealt with one of them herself. In fact, it surprised the young Uchiha how much he noticed her after she finally stopped pursuing him. She had started to knuckle down and study medical jutsu and genjutsu, and was doing exercises meant to increase her chakra reserves, and her growth since the Chunin exams was already surprising. There was a familiar pattern down there every now and then, but a small group of 4 cadets seemed to have pretty much taken on the role of self-appointed guardians of the playground, and as they stopped for a moment at the lighter earth near where that SHRK freak had been taken down, Sasuke realized who he was trying to measure himself against, and the shock almost sent him flying from the branch. He lay back against the trunk, watching the academy students emerge from their classes for the day. Sasuke recalled how Naruto had been treated in the basic schools and how many people in the village had continued to treat him until the Chunin exams and Orochimaru's attempted invasion. After that, it was as if many adults were waking up from a bad dream and realizing what was in front of them. Naruto had been improving ever since he was kidnapped all those years ago. He was growing stronger so quickly that no one realized how strong he truly was. As people began to refer to the neighborhood next to the Hyuga estate as the Uzumaki district, he leapt from the tree and began to walk in that direction. Naruto had categorically forbade the construction of any kind of enormous walls, such as those surrounding the old Uchiha compound, claiming that they encouraged pig-headedness and arrogance and that individual yards were preferable. He felt a dart hit his neck as he passed an alley that was just like any other, and he didn't know what else to do. Hokage. Sama, it's horrible. Shizune nearly lost her cool when she heard the news, and her first apprentice blurted out the rest while Tsunade's brow furrowed in perplexity. Sakura reported in, Uchiha Sasuke didn't show up for training like he always does, and the Anbu and Inuzuka trackers have found signs of a disturbance. We think he's been kidnapped. The timing of this could not have been worse. Kakashi was on another mission, Kurenai and Anko were overseeing the academy field trip, the majority of her Jonin were occupied with other tasks, and someone waltzed into Konoha, kidnapped the last of the Uchiha, and defeated the gate guards on their way out. She would be dealing with 2 dead Jonin, but fortunately the kidnappers were more concerned with getting away than with witnesses. Tsunade quickly gathered the troops. She would have preferred to avoid the necessity of bringing in a new Chunin to lead this squad. Nara Shikamaru, your mission is as follows. Sometime last night, Uchiha Sasuke was taken from Konoha, presumably against his will. You are in charge of assembling a team to get him back. By force if necessary. I have no Jonin available, and there's only a handful of battle-ready Chunin. She provided him with a list. You may select your retrieval squad from these, as well as any promising genin you are aware of. Any questions? The slack-jawed Nara was serious for once, without even flinching. No, Hokage. Sama. He was mentally assembling a squad already. 2 out of the 3 Chunin were available, according to a quick look at the scroll. Apparently, Shino did not return to active duty until he made up for the losses suffered by his colonies. When Shikamaru arrived, Otome, Naruto, and Hinata were having breakfast. The Hokage has a mission for you 3, he stated, and time is short. Let's go, we need to get a couple of others. They left in gloomy silence. Although Ginkumo Kura was still getting used to this Ate's sitting position, he was aware of what Shikanshi-sensei would want him to do. If the only person to beat me at shogi says he needs my talents, who am I to say otherwise? Shikamaru was prepared and braced as Choji sailed past him, grabbing the packet and chip at the same time, shaking the last chip out of the packet. Shikamaru described the circumstances as they all fled the crime scene, with his best friend chomping down on it. They reached the alley where the Anbu had tracked Sasuke down, and Naruto double-checked, so whoever these goons are, they got in, snatched Sasuke, and got out, taking down 2 Jonin swordsmen to do it. He inhaled deeply to detect any scent in the air and said, they'd have to be strong then. I've got his smell, but it's like they dunked him in something weird, smells of grease and old blood. There were 4 of them. One's a girl and they all have some kind of strange smell to them. Like Sasuke's curse. Mark actually. Kura and Shikamaru looked at one another, and even though the Nara Chunin had asked the question, it was the same one that was on both of their minds. Can you follow their sense? Naruto gave them a fierce look. Does Tsunade-sama hit like an elephant? When the Hokage sneezed in her office, Shizune remembered to grab her some cold remedies in case she needed them. They had stopped to rest, all 4 of them. Jirubu had put down the enormous bucket-shaped container that concealed their captive from the outside world, but even if those 2 Jonin hadn't been caught red-handed dosing the Uchiha boy and slapping Orochimaru's seal-breaking tag on his curse mark, the solid darkness inside would have been enough to raise suspicions. They were forced to use the second stage of their curse marks because they had been pushed so hard. Kitamaru and Kimimaru were both destroyed, but Jirubu fared the best, with Tayuya coming in second. While Kitamaru was recuperating well, Kimimaru's illness was taking its toll on him, causing him to cough up blood with every racking convulsion. The multi-armed shinobi and the bone wielder had been the ones hardest pressed in that altercation. But they dared not pause for very long. With Naruto on point and scouting the trail, Shikamaru had laid out the pursuit plan. Shikamaru was next in line to make any necessary adjustments to the plan and give orders. Then came Hinata, who covered the entire group in the surrounding area with her Byakugan, followed by Kura, who was flanked by Choji and Otome for a combination of traps and heavy hitters. 2 or 3 miles. It appeared that the kidnappers were heading for the northern borders, in the area of Ta no Kuni, and it was easy enough to tear through the trees at the fast pace they had set. Naruto stopped as they prepared for the intercept after Hinata called to report that she had spotted the Auto Ninja after they had been traveling for a few hours. "I can't see Sasuke," said Hinata, "but they do have a tub that would be large enough to carry him that's sealed solid. There's 4 of them. A large man, bigger than an Akamichi, another with 6 arms, a girl with some kind of metal hat, and the last one has white hair and dense chakra centered on his skeleton." The group paused for a moment and shrugged. The blonde Jinchuriki remarked, "I can't be sure, but he might be the one Orochimaru used me to try to cure. So who gets who?" Shikamaru put his fingers in the strange position he used to concentrate his thoughts and thought for a moment. "The big guy. There has to be more to him than just size. But he's definitely the heavy on their team. Choji, Otome, he's yours. These guys are all at least Chunin level, so 2 genin for one of them is a good plan, and then you catch up once he's dealt with. The guy with the arms. Weapons most likely, and he probably plays on his resemblance to a spider, too. Kura, Hinata, the 2 of you take him down. The girl is probably the least troublesome, so I call dibs on her. I'm fairly sure I can hold her long enough for someone to back me up. That leaves the last one for Naruto to renew his acquaintance with. Other than that, the plan is simple. Live, and bring our friend home." As they continued to close the gap between the 2 groups, the Konoha ninja were younger, and it was evident that the Auto Shinobi had already used their curse marks, which is a taxing endeavor that requires adequate rest. Desperate, the Auto elites dispersed and gathered in a dispersed formation to guard the tub. When the Konoha Shinobi arrived, they were encircled. Jirubu hit the ground with both hands and smashed his chakra into the mud dome prison, a Doden. This trapped all of the ninja in the dirt globe, which quickly started to deplete their chakra. When the Konoha Shinobi emerged from hiding in the branches, encircling their would-be ambushers, the large ninja panicked and started to look around. "I'll finish them," he told his allies, "and then I'll catch up." "Wait a second, where'd they go?" As planned, Choji and Otome leapt to the ground, Otome transforming into her skin of stone form even as she started to manipulate Stone Bear's chakra. Shikamaru remarked, "You might have a little problem with your plans right now." Several hurled kunai whistled past the slothful genius, saying, "How about you undo those seals and let us take Sasuke back to Konoha? It'll be less troublesome than having to fight to the death." "I guess that's a no." Kimimaro picked up the tub with Sasuke in it and started running north, with Tayuya and Kitamaru following closely behind, as Jirubu charged towards the tree with Shikamaru in it and Otome and Choji moved to intercept. Shikamaru glanced down and saw Choji give him the thumbs up. The group continued the chase, leaving the 2 stricken shinobi to battle their enormous foe. The 2 ninja left to battle the enormous Jirubu, braced for a fierce battle as the rest of their group moved into action. The Auto Nin gave a sneer. He mocked them, saying, "You do realize they've sacrificed you, right? They have left the weakest of you to face me, gambling that they can stop the others before I can finish you." Choji growled. People thought he was fat and therefore weak because he was larger than most children his age. He was prepared to wager that the same individuals or those of the same type, Aliasta would believe that Otome was weak because of her small size. He would simply have to prove his mistake to this man the hard way. Otome said, "Yup," shocking Choji. She braced her stance, dropping both fists to her hips, elbows back, as if chambering for a basic taijutsu attack, and increased the cycling of her chakra to reinforce the muscles, tendons, and bones. "They left the 2 weakest of us behind, to deal with you. I think that Shikamaru kid was being careful. I can probably take you myself, but he had Choji back me, because you can never guess what an enemy is capable of. Your best plans, they never survive contact with the enemy. But to you, we're the enemy." Choji pumped chakra into his right arm for his partial expansion, forcing his now massive fist the size of that tub from earlier into Jirubu's ample gut as he closed and placed his hand on her head, starting to squeeze. It was as if the muscle beneath the fat layer, which he suspected was thinner than it appeared, had hardened. Similar to striking the training ground's oak training posts with a hammer. However, Jirubu hadn't anticipated such a powerful hit at this moment, and Choji had previously broken those. He tightened his hold as the bigger man crumpled. He could focus on the little butterball and eliminate him if he could quickly kill this girl. Jirubu smiled as Choji winced at the gruesome snap that sounded, until the agony got to his brain and he let out a cry. His thumb was broken by the girl's reach. The girl assumed a strange combat stance, forcing the big man to let her go, and he staggered back, quickly setting the injured digit with his other hand. The Akamichi boy looked at his fellow Konoha ninja, who was in the stone bear style, her skin shining in the sunlight like stone. She had explained chakra cycling techniques to her new team, and her skin of stone Kekkei Genkai complemented them well. In fact, with Hinata's help, she demonstrated one of the benefits of the style. Due to the constantly shifting shield of chakra that filled her skin, it became nearly impossible for techniques and styles like the gentle fist to target the tenketsu and or vital organs through the cycling of chakra through the physical body rather than the chakra coils. She was, in fact, trying to outdo her own father, the stone bear, and he realized that she currently had another advantage. Given how tightly she controls her chakra, it would be extremely difficult for this Jirubu to pull it away and eat himself. During their training sessions and on the shared missions, Otome had observed Choji's techniques and had pondered absently how they might be combined with the stone bear techniques. She had decided that it would be too hard to manage the chakra flow over the larger area. As their opponent launched another attack, black lines starting to show from his curse mark, she had an idea. She took a step behind Choji and drew out the basic plan. Gripping his shoulders, she stepped up her chakra flow and said, "Choji, human boulder, spin as fast as you can." Though he wasn't entirely sure why, the young Akamichi obeyed, feeling his teammates' weight as an extra burden, and he rushed in Jirubu's direction. He felt Otome's hands drop from his shoulders just before impact, allowing her to be flung at the bigger Auto Ninja at the high speeds that Choji's technique had taught her. She screamed, "Uzumaki combination, Akamichi catapult," and flipped and twisted to lead with her heel in a spinning stone bear axe kick that sent the huge man to the ground, leaving a large divot in his forehead, his eyes already crossed and glazing over. However, the maneuver's sheer strength came at a cost, and even her heavily reinforced lega, which was reinforced by both stone bear techniques and her Kekkei Genkai, broke with a sickening crack. Tumbling across the ground didn't help, and her thigh had given way simultaneously with her shin. It hurt more, if anything. Choji continued to grind Jirubu's body into the ground while holding his human boulder, letting go of the jutsu as he came to rest on a barely conscious Otome. He insisted, "Why did you do that? We could have defeated him without that kind of move." The girl dropped her own techniques and he was hushed by her hand. She gasped as he lifted her, nearly fainting from the pain, saying, "Because by the time we'd taken him down he'd have us both exhausted and hurt, and neither one of us would be able to get the other back to Konoha." She barely managed the next few words before losing consciousness because she was pretty certain she shouldn't be seeing her bone protruding from her thigh in that manner. It could have taken days for someone to find us, but this way. Choji glanced at his friend below. He had come to like the girl from Iwa, and Ino enjoyed having someone other than Sakura to go shopping with. He muttered a few words and sped back towards Konoha, looking in the direction the retrieval squad had gone. "Good luck, all of you, I'll catch up soon." As he and his friends sped through the trees, Kitamaru swore. When he told them, "The brats split up, 2 of them stopped to hold back Lardbud, and the rest are on our trail." Kimimaro scowled. He was deteriorating faster, and given what had happened in Konoha lately, this boy might be Lord Orochimaru's last opportunity to win those Uchiha eyes. He resisted the urge to cough and said, "And you would then recommend?" There was no way to make the plan infallible, and it was simple. "I'll set a trap to catch some, and a bit further on, Tayuya peels away to catch the rest. That should give you enough lead. Time to get the target to Orochimaru. Sama." If only Sakin and Yukon were still with them. The group landed in the clearing to regroup after Hinata spotted the explosive tags well ahead of their position and detonated them with her kunai and shuriken. Kitamaru's trap detonated at that moment, and a web of weird material that resembled silk appeared all around them. The pursuers were trapped, as Kitamaru had intended, but they did not remain there. Kura's feet crackled with lightning chakra, and his kunai struck out in a blur, cutting the silk around Shikamaru and Naruto. Hinata then slapped the silk wall next to her with a gentle storm strike, blowing out a large portion of the webbing so that they could continue the chase. However, Naruto left with a backward glance, as she used the same elemental chakra mix through her feet as through her hands, blasting her way free as she caught a kunai from the air and started deflecting the remaining steel rain that poured from the surrounding area. She yelled, "It's the 6. Armed one," and Kura, hiding behind a tree, nodded. Then something came flying at a different angle from the trees, a globule of thick liquid that slapped her hands together before solidifying. The silken strands were immune to her technique because they lacked chakra. She still had a sharp kunai, though. As the girl continued to move, the spider, like Auto Ninja, kept a close eye on her and grinned as she cut the silk around her hands. This one was stronger than the other, which was most likely just a genin. He was positive that she would pose a bigger threat because he recalled what she had done at the Chunin exams. Silent and smiling, he set off the next trap, bringing out his curse. Mark. This time, Hinata had to use the gentle storm to strike down and break the silk ropes that swung out from the trees because they were saturated with black chakra, which resisted her attempts to cut them with the kunai she had acquired. Her palm barely deflected the arrow that roared past her, and as it hammered into the tree Kura was behind, the friction of its passage burned a line across her palm. As a great number of kunai and shuriken made from a harder version of this silk, like material, thudded into the area where Kidomaru had been, the former Kumo genin took advantage of the situation and jumped out of cover, landing on the arrow with his feet crackling. He then disappeared from view. Kidomaru heard a quiet, unflappable voice, but he was still fighting to force himself to activate the second stage of his curse. Mark. Lightning step. Thunderbreaker. Kura's right knee's heavily cushioned and reinforced knee pad was the last thing he saw before hearing the crunch of separating vertebrae. He wasn't really in a state to appreciate anything after that. Impressive move, Hinata exclaimed, panting. A significant amount of her chakra reserves had been depleted by her dodging and blocking. Why couldn't he dodge? Kura grinned. As Hinata shook her head, he checked on the Auto Ninja and was surprised to find him alive, albeit unconscious, with his neck and spine broken. Lightning travels at roughly 150 kilometers per second, Hinata.san. By the time he'd thrown his weapons, it was already too late. Unfortunately, I have to have a conductive surface to cross, but his webs had to conduct his chakra, or your gentle storm would not have affected them. After that, it was a matter of opportunity. I can look after this one, Hinata.san. You go reinforce Shikamaru.san and Naruto. Sama. Tayuya pushed herself into the second stage of her mark's power while standing on the tree branch with her right hand covered in blood. She slammed her palm against the branch as she saw the two shinobi pursuing them, calling forth the hideous creatures that served as her puppets. She then raised her flute to play a high-pitched melody. She stopped when the second ninja scattered in a cloud of smoke and the other two fell, both of them covering their ears in clear pain. And Shikamaru struck her skull with the butt of a kunai, causing the shadows to flicker. He started to fasten the Oto Kunoichi, nodding to Naruto as he pulled reels of ninja wire out of his pouch. Tsunade surveyed her team of reinforcers. Even as Shizune broke the news of Choji's return with an injured Otome, Ino, Sakura, Kiba, and Akamaru started running. You are to reinforce and support the retrieval team. Now get going, she said. When the pursuit eventually left the forest, Naruto stumbled to his feet. The Valley of the End was just a few miles to the north, but Naruto wasn't going to allow it to get that far. He gave it his all in an attempt to capture the oppressed Auto elite. Apparently realizing this, Kimimaro put the tub down without observing that the seals that held it in place had started to smoke a little. He said, enough, in a chilly tone. Even as Naruto raised a kunai in each hand and charge, the pale man reached up to his shoulders, two bones protruding through the flesh, and yanked the bone swords from his own body, adopting a stance that spoke of kenjutsu expertise. My master demands that I return with this body for him, and I'll not let some pitiful shinobi child stop me from carrying out his wishes. With deep gouges in the metal of his kunai and deep cuts to his forearms that were already starting to heal, Naruto's initial battle was telling as he leapt back from the blades his opponent wielded. He threw both kunai at the approaching enemy, who deflected them both with the sword in his left hand. Well, that answers the question of whether it's the same guy or not, he thought. He took a moment to look at the young man before him. That was futile, they said. All you have managed is to throw away your only weapons. They would not have saved you, but they might have prolonged this. And now you face my blades. As his opponent got closer and cut Naruto's final kunai in half, Naruto shrugged. The ninja from Konoha inquired, how do you do that? Your swords are bone, and most bone isn't that strong. Kimimaro sneered, the dead bone pulse is my keke genkai, boy. He closed with a few spinning steps, almost dancing, and lashed out faster than Naruto could move, the sword in his right hand sweeping towards Naruto's neck faster than the young shinobi could react. It allows me to shape and extract my bones for this purpose, and there is no way for you to break them. The chakra that runs through me makes the bones as strong as tempered steel, making each bone the equivalent of a katana. You are doomed. Give up now and it shall be quick. The backup team arrived, lured by the scent, and Kura looked up. He pointed to his immobile prisoner. who was strapped to a makeshift backboard using his own silk. "Do you think we can stabilize this guy?" he asked. "He might know a few things." Ino gave a nod. She turned to the prisoner and grinned, a smirk that was almost malevolent and most likely vicious. "Sakura, you and Kiba get going. I can handle this part. We don't want to lose any information he has before we get him back to Konoha if he dies, after all." She held up her hands. Yamanaka clan jutsu, mind walking. Even as the enemy shinobi swept his sword in the arc meant to decapitate her husband, Hinata's heart skipped a few beats when she arrived at the edge of the forest and saw Naruto. Even if that man were to kill her Naru-kun, he would not live long enough to accomplish anything else. The snap of bone reminded her of the fight instead of her thoughts of revenge. She could see the whole scene clearly, but her attention was drawn to the broken piece of bone blade that spun away and dug, point down, into the open field. The bone metal blade that sprang from Naruto's shoulder to snare his sword and snap it clean at impact startled Kimimaro. That wasn't supposed to happen, neither did he want to use the curse mark. He would never make it through it, it would cut his life too short, and if the Uchiha boy fell, no one would be left to take him to Orochimaru. As he jumped backwards, he threw away the broken sword and gave the other one back, even as Naruto formed a blade on his other shoulder, as well as from each elbow and his kneecaps. His forehead was covered in plating, and an armored bone metal mask formed around his cheekbones and brow. The boy then revealed his claws. With a hint of fear in his voice, the Auto Elite questioned, "What kind of monster are you?" Naruto's response was unsettling. "The kind your master created trying to cure you, before discarding me to die as useless, never realizing what he'd done. I should have died. I didn't. Instead, I took that which was killing me, everything that had been done to me, and I refused to die. My bloodline kept me alive, and reached out for what it could use to help me survive, and remade me. And now, I choose not to be the monster your master proved himself to be, the one he would have made me, and did make you. If he's waiting for Sasuke, then he can wait until the stars burn down to ash." With a horrible ratcheting sound, a gory wrenching sound that sounded like it was intended to induce nausea, Kimimaro reached to the back of his neck and pulled out his own backbone. Naruto smiled. "I guess I can't call you spineless at any rate. But are you sure that throwing away all those bones you keep pulling out is good for you?" The younger shinobi was pushing wind and lightning chakra into the bone metal even as he spoke, and he jumped over it as his opponent swung the backbone like a whip, his shoulder blades growing edged spines and his back sprouting spikes. As Kimimaro changed course, his spinal whip swung around and hit the flying blonde in the air. The top third of the bony lash was severed by Naruto's elbow blade, which caused it to break apart into pieces. But the remainder of the whip slammed into his side, creating a lengthy, freely bleeding gash. Naruto could sense some sickness or malaise deep within the lash bone as he hissed and the wound started to close, attempting to cling to his own skeleton. But since it was by no means his first exposure, his Sokai Katsuryoku put an end to it in a matter of seconds. Naruto dragged the claws out the side of the Auto Nin's torso, scattering pieces of bone as he went. Kimimaro tried to catch at them with his ribcage, but the Arashi no Sume cut through the bones as easily as they had the tempered steel of a sword. Kimimaro realized he had no choice but to face the tub. He would die without completing his mission, so he had to activate his curse mark and hope it lasted long enough for him to complete it. The smoldering seals on the tub could no longer support Hinata as she stood at the edge of the field, and the wooden vessel exploded as Sakura and Kiba, led by Akamaru, caught up to her as if it were the hardest thing she had ever done. Kimimaro's stunned and impaled form unintentionally protected Naruto, and even as the Auto Nin died, his internal organs ruptured and failed. A long splinter as thick as his arm protruded from the back of his skull as he fell, and Naruto saw it at an angle that slipped past his skull and into his brain. However, nobody was giving that more than a cursory glance. Something that could only be Sasuke stood in the tiny hole created by the tub's explosion. But as Sasuke opened his pure black eyes and screamed, a horrible sound of pain and rage, as the unfiltered and concentrated black chakra of the curse mark poured off him in waves, killing the nearby grass.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.